Hello there, good morning. Welcome to Breakfast with me, Jon Kay, live in Downing Street on the day a new Prime Minister is appointed. Sally is in the studio in Salford, and here are your headlines this morning. Liz Truss will be handed the keys to number 10 this afternoon after beating Conservative leadership rival Rishi Sunak to the top job. But first, of course, Boris Johnson will have to give his parting words, a final speech just behind us here before he flies to Balmoral to meet the Queen and formally resign. We'll bring you all that live on the programme this morning. And of course, we'll look at what is in Liz Truss's very full in-tray when she walks through that famous black door, including how to tackle soaring energy bills.
Good morning from Lee in Greater Manchester. This is the former mining town that turned Tory. I've been speaking to voters here about what they want from their next Prime Minister.
Also this morning, one of two suspects in Sunday's mass stabbings in the Canadian province of Saskatchewan has been found dead. The other remains at large.
And in sport this morning, as Rafa Nadal.
Plus, after a night of more spectacular storms, it's a day of sunshine and showers across the country today. I'll tell you where and when to expect them. All the details coming up here on Breakfast.
Hello there, good morning. Tuesday the 6th of September. Welcome to Downing Street. It's one of those dates that's going to go down in the history books because in a matter of few hours, number 10 will be welcoming its newest resident. And we know now, of course, who it's going to be. Liz Truss. She was elected leader of the Conservative Party yesterday. She's had overnight to get her head around things, to make her appointments, to make her plans. This morning, Boris Johnson leaves here. He formally resigns as Prime Minister, bringing his three-year premiership to an end. And then Liz Truss will arrive and take over. This morning, we're going to look at the challenges, the many, multiple, huge challenges she faces just in those early moments. But first, here's this from our political correspondent, Ian Watson.
In one day, we'll hear from two Prime Ministers. In this street, a transfer of power will take place without a general election. Early this morning, Boris Johnson will give his final speech as Prime Minister. Then late this afternoon, Liz Truss, his successor, chosen by Conservative members, will set out her stall. But what will happen in between? The Queen is still in residence at Balmoral, so Boris Johnson will fly to Scotland to resign, and Liz Truss will make the same journey to be asked by the Queen to form a government. Then she'll get the keys to Downing Street and get to work.
I campaigned as a Conservative, and I will govern as a Conservative.
She'll announce her new cabinet, the very top jobs in government, this evening. The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, is likely to move next door to her at number 11 Downing Street as Chancellor. Former leadership candidate Suella Braverman seems set to become Home Secretary. And Education Secretary James Cleverly is expected to take over from Liz Truss at the Foreign Office. Liz Truss will face daunting challenges on multiple fronts. A substantial NHS backlog even before we reach winter. A war in Europe with the need for continued support for Ukraine, and at the very summit of our overflowing in-tray, the cost of living crisis and burgeoning energy bills.
There can be no justification for not freezing energy prices. There's a political consensus that needs to happen. She needs to answer the question, how is she going to pay for that? Labour have been clear it needs to be a windfall tax on oil and gas companies. So she needs to show that she actually understands and can meet the challenges that are there after 12 years of failure of this Tory government.
Liz Truss has proved she can run a successful campaign, but running a government, especially in times like these, well, that will be a more testing challenge. Ian Watson, BBC News, Westminster.
So that's how we got to this point. Very quickly now, it's going to move because our new Prime Minister takes over later this afternoon. And I tell you what, standing here this morning, you can feel it. You can feel that sense of impending change. The media are here from all over the world, probably 4 or 5 times more than there were at this time yesterday. The photographers have got their positions in the stands to get those shots of one Prime Minister leaving. And then, of course, this afternoon, a new Prime Minister arriving. So this is what you need to know this morning. This is how it's going to pan out over the next few hours. At 7:30, Boris Johnson will deliver his final speech as Prime Minister. And he's going to do that here, right outside the doors of number 10, the address that he's about to leave. And then he'll quit Downing Street physically and politically And unusually, because the Queen is staying at Balmoral, he's going to head to Scotland, and that is where he will meet the Queen and where he will formally resign. The choreography means that Liz Truss then makes her way to Balmoral, so they come and go separately. She meets the Queen, who asks her to form a government. That is the moment when Liz Truss officially becomes the Prime Minister, and then she will return to Downing Street. We think it's during that journey that she'll get things like the nuclear codes and she'll get all those security briefings, and then she comes straight here. We expect she will deliver her first speech outside the famous Black Door this afternoon, weather permitting, because there's questions about a storm. We'll talk to Matt about that a bit later. And then following her speech, the new Prime Minister starts appointing her cabinet. As Ian was just reporting there, we know some of them pretty much already, but she'll finalise those before preparing for Prime Minister's questions down the road in the House of Commons tomorrow. Some first day at work, isn't it? Well, as Boris Johnson leaves this morning, he'll travel to see the Queen a bit later. We talked to Nick Eardley, our chief political correspondent, who's with us here. I was saying you can feel it. You really can feel it. The energy outside, goodness knows what the energy's like inside, but energy's what it's all about, isn't it? Those energy bills she's going to have to be addressing straight off.
Yeah, look, I mean, as we were saying yesterday, it's absolutely top of the in tray for Liz Truss. What she's going to do about the bills that millions of families are going to struggle to pay, that thousands of businesses are going to struggle with as well. I think what we're going to be talking about by the end of the week is a price freeze, some sort of mechanism that would mean the cap on bills remains the same for the next few months. There were talks last night between senior people in Liz Truss's team, the people that will be around that cabinet table when we're here tomorrow morning, and the energy companies. They were thrashing out the final details of that. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but the expectation is that it's going to be loans which would be paid back by the energy companies and probably by us through bills over the next few years. Now, I don't think that will be universally popular. We know that Labour, the Lib Dems, the SNP all think you need to tax the oil and gas companies more on their record profits to pay for this sort of thing. Some Tories are pretty uncomfortable with the idea of that sort of level, £100 billion potentially of state intervention, but I think that's where we're going to end up by the end of the week.
And the choreography of this moment, it is one of those moments where we remember it. These are the pictures that will be shown when Liz Truss leaves office, aren't they, as well as on the day that she arrives, of course. What will she be wanting to say today, to set the mood, the tone at this crucial moment for every single one of us?
It's so interesting because this is her moment to deliver her vision to the country.
To define herself. Yeah.
Exactly, to say, here's what I want to do with this amazingly powerful address, that here's what I want to make happen before the next general election. I think she'll talk about things like the NHS, I think she'll talk about different issues like tax, like growing the economy. But look, there is one thing that she has to hit the ground running on, which is those energy bills. It's the cost of living. It's the biggest issue facing the country just now. It's something that's going to define her premiership. So I think she knows she has to talk a lot about that today. There's also that question of the Conservative Party's future. You know, we've covered for the last few weeks some of the bitter rows that have been happening. I think when Boris Johnson leaves here this morning, he's likely to talk about the party uniting, needing to get behind the new Prime Minister, but that's going to be a challenge for her as well. The makeup of her cabinet is going to be really important. I was chatting to Tory MPs yesterday afternoon, and a lot of those who were a bit sceptical of Ms Truss said one thing she could do to reach out to them is to appoint some people from different wings of the party. And I've got to say, from the plans I've seen for her cabinet so far, the people I've been talking to, I think that's unlikely. I think we're looking at a pretty loyalist Truss cabinet with some of her key allies in top jobs. But there are all these battles she's going to have over the next few weeks. The NHS, political battles within her own party, political battles with the opposition as well. The biggest one, though, is that cost of living crisis and the energy bills.
I guess if she can turn the polls around, give the Conservatives a bit of a boost, she can buy herself a bit of time as far as any challenges are concerned. But if it doesn't go right very quickly, she could be in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think her party will give her the benefit of the doubt for a while, but remember, she's got the party conference in a month. She has to show what she wants to do certainly by then. We got a hint from her yesterday, I thought, in that brief speech she gave, her Tory leadership acceptance speech, that we're not going to see a general election for a couple of years as things stand. She said, you know, we will win in 2024 was her message, which suggests no early general election. But prime ministers are defined by what they do in their early period. You know, if it doesn't go well, it can be really hard to recover. She'll probably get a bit of a bounce over the next few days. She'll get a lot of airtime. She'll get a chance to sell herself to the country. But she also comes in with this daunting entry, a huge economic crisis, potentially recession being confirmed within weeks, inflation getting higher and higher, the cost of living crisis. She's delighted to be Prime Minister. This is her big moment today. But the backdrop to it is about as daunting as any PM's had in the last few decades.
Nick, for now, thank you very much indeed. Nick Eardley will be keeping us company right through the programme, talking us through this, because an awful lot is going to happen right here, a couple of feet from where I'm standing at the moment. Boris Johnson will be leaving here in about an hour's time, we think, and will take his final statement at about 7:30. Of course, he's not unfamiliar when it comes to, you know, a quick dig or a little comment or a joke there, so it'll be interesting to see how he handles that moment himself, how he says goodbye, how he sets the tone of how we remember in the future. But then he goes to Balmoral. That's where he offers his resignation formally to the Queen. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell is there for us this morning. Nick, again, history in another way, because this meeting, a new Prime Minister being appointed, would normally happen at Buckingham Palace, not at Balmoral.
Well, absolutely. And good morning, John. Good morning from Balmoral here in the Scottish Highlands. And the good news is it's not raining. The weather forecasters improved significantly overnight. Over there you see the gates to Balmoral, to the estate, to the castle, where the outgoing and incoming Prime Ministers will be arriving later. Now, do you know, it's nearly 140 years since a British Prime Minister last had to make the journey all the way up to the Scottish Highlands to be appointed. That was in 1885. The Prime Minister then was Lord Salisbury. The monarch, of course, was Queen Victoria. It took several days, all the travelling. Today it should be much quicker. The outgoing Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, will arrive here at around 11:30, having been driven from Aberdeen. He will tender his resignation to the Queen in the drawing room of Balmoral Castle. And then shortly after midday, having been driven, again, the 45 miles from Aberdeen, the incoming Prime Minister, Liz Truss, will arrive. She will meet the Queen in the drawing room. She will be invited to form a government, and from that moment she will be Prime Minister. The whole ceremony is known as the kissing of hands. In fact, there is no kissing, merely a handshake. And with that, she will then return to London as Prime Minister to begin work.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. Nick Witchell will be keeping an eye on things for us at Balmoral this morning. We'll rejoin you a bit later. Hopefully the rain will stay away, and Matt will have the weather for us this morning, because I guess Boris Johnson's going to need to know what he needs to wear to come out here and speak to the world's media, and Liz Truss definitely does for later this afternoon, because there are heavy storms over London a bit later in the day. Lots of guests to come. Should we look through this morning's papers though, because it's quite interesting how the various publications are spinning this, reporting this morning. There's the front page of the Daily Mail. They've been very supportive of Liz Truss throughout her campaign. A nice smiling picture of her. It says, no Prime Minister since Maggie Thatcher has had a tougher in tray, but cometh the hour, cometh the woman, is the Mail's front page. The Times there, using the same front page picture, but their headline is straight to business and focusing on those energy bills, the speculation that despite having said no more handouts several times during the early part of her leadership campaign, the suggestion now, the understanding now from her campaign team is that there is going to be help for bill payers over the next few weeks, but we'll get news of that on Thursday. Referring to that, Liz puts her foot on the gas, about to freeze energy bills. The new MP, front page of The Sun. The Guardian, rather more sceptical, as you might expect. Truss wins, but can she avert the looming crisis? Pieces there questioning not just the energy crisis, inflation, the NHS, Ukraine, climate change. It goes into a lot of detail about the various other issues that our new Prime Minister is going to have to deal with. And this is a visually striking front page, isn't it, on the Mirror this morning. Same old Tories, it says, and it has this rather strange, it takes you a while to get your head around it, but we go from David Cameron on the left to morphs sort of Doctor Who style into Theresa May, into Boris Johnson, who then becomes Liz Truss. 4 consecutive Conservative Prime Ministers over the course of, well, all 4 of them have lived here at Downing Street in the last 6 years. So we're going to hear from lots of guests throughout this morning's programme, from within the Conservative Party, but also from their opponents, people who live and breathe Westminster politics, but also people around the country who aren't really bothered about the machinations, the choreography of this. They just want to know how it's going to affect them and their normal lives around the UK. But let's cross now to College Green. John Maguire is there right outside the Houses of Parliament, and John's going to be grabbing people for us all morning. Hi, John.
Yeah, morning to you, John. You've got the camera gantries where you are. We've got the tented village surrounding us here, as you say. Many representatives from the world's media to see the anointment of a new Prime Minister later on in the day. Now, somebody that's known Liz Truss for, well, we were figuring it out, 25 to 30 years since they were students at Oxford University all those decades ago, is Mark Littlewood. Mark, good morning to you.
Morning,
Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs. Did you ever imagine, did she used to tell you she wanted to be world queen all those years ago?
I guess she was somewhere on the list of people that you thought might make it. I mean, people who study politics at Oxford, a good number of them tend to go on to become Prime Minister. If you told me what were the bookies' odds when I first met her that she might be Prime Minister, I might have said 1,000 to 1, something like that. You've got to remember she was in the Liberal Democrat Society at the time. If you told me she'd go on to be Prime Minister with the enthusiastic backing of people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, I would have said that was longer odds. But she was actually burst onto the political scene as a youngster at Oxford University. She was quite a character, and I think she would have been one on various people's lists to expected to at least make it to Parliament. Whether anybody thought she'd get quite this high, well, that's a different question.
So many different qualities are needed to climb to the top of that greasy pole. There's been a lot of talk about whether she's changed, how much she's changed. As a youngster, she went on CND marches. She made an anti-monarchist speech. I'm sure she won't be talking to the Queen about that later on today. Has she changed?
Well, in personality terms, not at all. And there's actually one feature that I think's an unusual feature that doesn't usually help you climb to the top of the greasy pole, and that is that she is unbelievably outspoken. You might even say fantastically indiscreet. It is very difficult to spend more than 5 minutes in her time without knowing exactly where she stands on an issue or about a particular person. And most politicians who seek to climb the greasy pole play their cards very close to their chest. You don't necessarily know where they stand. She's always been extremely outspoken. That hasn't changed at all. Lots of people talk about her political journey. OK, she comes from left-wing background with her parents. But actually, although she switched from Liberal Democrat to Conservative, and although she was on the Remain side in the referendum over Brexit and now seems to be a rather enthusiastic Brexiteer, so she's changed some policy positions. You quite rightly say, I'm sure she won't be talking republicanism with Her Majesty the Queen at Balmoral. But although she's changed some policy positions, there's been a hugely consistent underlying philosophy. She's always been a supporter of individual liberty, open and free markets, highly sceptical about vested interests, highly sceptical about what big government can achieve, oftentimes thinking that that does more harm than good. And I think that's actually been consistent since I first knew Liz Truss as a teenager. She's just changed some policy positions by applying that to changing circumstances.
And if she is such a supporter of an open and free market, and we do end up getting this intervention in the energy market, which so many people are clambering for, what does that say about her? Does that mean that she sort of changed her spots on the first day in the job?
Well, let's have a look. I've seen lots of reports about the energy policy, and I've got to say this will be a pretty unpropitious start for Liz Truss. So she campaigned on let's go against the Treasury orthodoxy and Gordon Brown style economics. Fixing the price of energy is not the long-term solution to the energy market. We need to get the government out of the way and back to liberal open markets. Now, I'd like to see the details. We don't know how long the price fix would go on for. The energy market's completely broken in the United Kingdom because there's so much government intervention, not just because of the problem in the Ukraine. So, look, I appreciate that she's got an immediate political pressure on her to do something, but I do hope if there's price fixing involved, we quickly segue towards the sort of open free markets that she purports to support.
OK, very quick, almost a one-word answer, really. I'm sorry, because we're running out of time. You went to her party last night. How was she? What was her mood?
I don't know where she gets the energy from. She still looks fresh as a daisy after what must have been 2 months from hell when she should have had a summer holiday. She's going to have to keep that up. Thank God her metabolic rate's extremely high, but she's going to have to work 20-hour days for a long while.
Yeah. I'm sure you're absolutely right. Mark Littlewood, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. An insight there into Liz Truss as the young woman, the woman who later on today, of course, will become Prime Minister. Whether John and I are obsessed with it today, this morning, because we're expecting some rain later on, hopefully not in our time, I think Matt will be able to tell us what's in store. Matt, over to you.
I can indeed, John. Very good morning to you. Dry there in London at the moment. A few heavy, maybe thundery showers later, but perhaps not quite as spectacular as those which hit London and other parts of the UK last night. It was another disturbed night for many of you. Those storms have now eased somewhat. The rain has moved on. It's frazzled a little bit. It's across northeast England into parts of central Scotland at the moment. You notice a gap between the showers at the moment in Balmoral, but we'll see some rain here as we go through the middle part of the morning. Those showers and heavier downpours will push their way northwards. Small chance of a rumble of thunder. A few showers already towards western coast of Wales, southwest England, where it's going to be a blustery day, and they will develop more widely as we go into the afternoon. Not quite as warm as yesterday. It's still pretty warm and humid start, but this afternoon temperatures down a few degrees. And if you just take a closer look into the afternoon, you can see we're going to continue to see some showers develop more widely through the second half of the day. This batch here could be working its way towards the London area through the afternoon and evening. Showers elsewhere well scattered. A greater chance of seeing some rain at times through today compared with yesterday. Balmoral will back into the dry weather through the middle part of the afternoon, but will be more showers working their way northwards into tonight, which could merge into some longer spells of heavy and thundery rain overnight. We'll lose some of the showers elsewhere, but they'll continue towards southern and western parts of England and Wales, and maybe around some coastal parts of Northern Ireland. Temperatures not quite as high as they were last night, but another pretty warm night. And then things through the rest of this week turn a bit cooler. Still some rain at times, though, with low pressure dominating. That's how it's looking. Sally, it's back to you.
Matt, thanks very much indeed. We'll see you again later on. Now, one of two men accused of killing 10 people in a series of mass stabbings in Western Canada has been found dead. Damien Sanderson's body was found in the James Smith Cree Nation, while his brother Miles Sanderson remains at large. The attacks, which left another 18 people injured, are some of the worst acts of violence in Canada's recent history. Our correspondent Nomi Iqbal reports.
This is one of the worst acts of violence in Canada's recent history. Here in the capital of Regina, it's late, it's fairly calm, people are out and about, but there is a huge manhunt underway, and you're notified of that through your mobile phone. There are these piercing alerts that you get warning people to make their safety a priority. Police are looking for a man named Miles Sanderson. They've accused him and his brother Damien Sanderson of stabbing 10 people to death and injuring 18 others. But the body of Damien Sanderson has been found. It was found in James Smith Cree Nation. It's an Indigenous community where most of the victims were found. It's about a 3-hour drive from where I am. Now, these sorts of mass killings are pretty rare in Canada. And the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has given a press conference. He's described what has happened as heartbreaking and said that the government is ready to help in any way it can.
Nomia Iqbal reporting for us there. Now, detectives investigating the fatal shooting of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool have been given a further 36 hours to question 3 suspects. A 34-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder in the early hours of Sunday. 2 other men, aged 29 and 41, are also being held on suspicion of assisting an offender. Olivia was shot in her home 15 days ago as her mother tried to stop a gunman entering the family home. The Duchess of Sussex has given her first speech in the UK since she stepped down as a working royal. Speaking in Manchester at a global summit for young people, Meghan told the audience about her own struggle for self-belief, as our correspondent Judith Morris reports.
As crowds go, this one was well warmed up before the headline act arrived.
Please welcome Meghan and Harry.
And if the Duke and Duchess of Sussex were hoping for a positive reception, they got it. Young delegates from more than 200 countries watched Meghan make her first speech in the UK since the couple moved to California.
Well, good evening, everyone. It is very nice to be back in the UK.
She talked about how parenthood has changed her.
I was now married, and I was now a mom. Seeing the global community through the eyes of my child, and I would ask, what is this world he would come to adopt? And what can we do? What can I do to make it better? I am thrilled that my husband is able to join me here this time, to be able to see and witness firsthand my respect for this organization, this incredible organization, and all that it provides as well as accomplishes.
This event has been carefully chosen by the Duchess of Sussex. She has a long connection with the organisation behind it, but it also means that she's speaking to an international rather than solely a British audience.
Security around the event was arranged privately. Prince Harry's currently embroiled in a legal dispute with the Home Office about the downgrading of his police protection. The couple did get up close and personal with a few of those on stage, including Halima Aden, a Somali-American model who was born in a refugee camp.
I look up to her as a young black woman myself. I feel like she's paving the way for a lot of women.
You got a selfie.
And I got my selfie. I'm a happy trooper. She approached me, so I was like, I gotta shoot my shot. It's now or never. Like, how often do you get to meet Prince Harry and Meghan Markle? So I was having a little fangirl moment. Got my selfie in, and I'm so happy.
The Sussexes will hope for a similarly warm reception for the rest of their trip. For now, though, the selfie tells the story. Smiles all round. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Manchester.
We are back in Downing Street with John in just a couple of minutes, but it's time now to get the news, the travel and the weather where you are this morning.
Hello, good morning. Welcome back to Downing Street. This is where breakfast comes from live this morning because Boris Johnson has spent his last night here. He's waking up this morning, having his last Downing Street breakfast as Prime Minister before he officially hands over power to Liz Truss a little bit later today. We've just seen the first of the bits of technical kit coming out, being wheeled out, because in about an hour's time, exactly an hour's time, live here on breakfast, Boris Johnson will emerge from number 10, from behind that door, and they're going to set up a lectern. I think they've marked it out with a bit of tape just in the last few minutes of where it's going to go. There we go, that little bit there in the middle of the tarmac is the tape that marks where the lectern will go, where Boris Johnson will deliver his final speech as Prime Minister. How will he say goodbye? Will there be any digs, any jokes? What's his tone today? And then, of course, later on, how does Liz Truss begin her premiership? It's got all of Westminster talking, but of course, what most people around the UK want to know, what everybody around the UK wants to know is, what is Liz Truss going to do to tackle the cost of living crisis? What's she going to do about those fuel bills? We're waiting still to find out what that policy is going to be. Lots of speculation. But Nina is in Lee in Greater Manchester for us this morning. That was a red wall seat for almost 100 years. Boris Johnson won it for the Conservatives in 2019. But can Liz Truss win it back in terms of the election, but before that, just in terms of mood and in terms of policy? Nina is there for us this morning. What are people saying, Nina, about what they want from their new Prime Minister?
Yeah, that is a key question, John. Welcome to Astley Green Village. This is Lancashire's Mining Museum. Have a look behind me at this massive totem of history. That trellis and winding gear used to go 2/3 of a mile down into the ground, deep down, about the height of 5 Blackpool towers on top of each other. Men, women, and I've been learning this morning, some small children also taken down there. Then they'd hop onto diesel trains like this and be taken to the coal face. This part of the northwest used to be surrounded by collieries. It could not have been more labour. And that's why in 2019, when it fell to the Conservatives, another brick in the red wall, it was nothing short of a political earthquake. Since then, though, we've left the European Union, there's been a global pandemic, and now we are in the depths of an energy crisis. I've been speaking to voters here in Lee about what they want from Liz Truss. Here we go.
I give notice that Liz Truss is elected as the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party.
And so a new chapter begins.
She was all about tax cuts, but it doesn't help people on carers allowance.
Liz Truss promised bold plans to help with rising costs, but what you need now depends who you are.
She carried on working for a few months after she was diagnosed.
This is Tony. He gave up work suddenly when his wife Sue developed pulmonary fibrosis. He went from being a high-rate taxpayer to living off a carer's allowance. Their life savings are fading fast. Does it feel fair?
It's the most unfair thing. It's heartbreaking, full stop, watching a loved one. As you'll know, if you've got anybody that you love, it's painful. And you're totally unsupported.
And when you look to what comes next for you and for Sue, what does it look like? What needs to happen?
Well, I have an outcome for me and Sue, unfortunately, because this is a fatal disease. But I need and I want, just like every other carer wants, they want to be recognised for what they do.
Kathleen runs a cooked meat stall. What she worries about is how her 15 employees will cope this winter. Do you think she gets it?
I'm not sure whether she gets it, but I think if she actually comes and speaks to people and actually sees how people live.
And a freeze to corporation tax?
If businesses can't survive because nobody's buying the products, it doesn't matter what corporation tax is.
There are those whose loyalties lie elsewhere.
I would support Labour anyway.
There are those who wish it had fallen a bit differently.
I would have preferred Richard to get it, but hey-ho.
And then there are some with, frankly, more important things to worry about right now. Liz Truss?
No.
Heard of her?
No.
That's all right, you've got a lot on. Josephine has cerebral palsy and is full-time carer for her husband. She says financial support for the disabled has been disappearing for decades. How much money have you and Gary got in your pocket as the cost of living goes up?
None. None. We have to borrow from family, friends, and then when we do get our money in, obviously then all the money that we get in has to go out to pay people back.
You voted Conservative in 2019. Would you vote for Liz Truss next?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, because I feel that she's doing more than a lot of other people have done.
Josephine's is just one voice in many millions. Liz Truss has won the keys to number 10. Now the challenge begins to keep them.
Well, we're in the engine room now, part of that massive piece of history for Lee, for Greater Manchester, the North West, and indeed across the UK. But what they told me here is that they respect the past, they value the past. What matters now is the future. Let's have a chat with Les, who runs, a high street estate agency. Sorry about that, Les, my battery pack has just fallen out. When you talk to people looking to buy houses, what do they say to you at the moment? How much is the cost of living crisis affecting them?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I think there's a real challenge in terms of the overall cost of living and the affordability of it. But people have to live somewhere, and if you consider the cost of purchasing compared to rental costs, it's a much more affordable if they can get the deposits sorted.
You said to me earlier that people are buying at the moment, but they're worried about the extras.
Yeah, I think there was the cost of a lot of the costs were unknown when they did make their buying decisions possibly 12 months ago. I think these extra costs are eating into their disposable income.
And we heard that potentially there will be government-backed loans handed out to energy companies that would take the sting out of the spike for the next 18 months or so. But long-term, we'd all be paying back a little bit more, perhaps for the next decade. Is that the kind of plan you think could work? Don't worry, I'll keep hold of that.
All right, sorry. Yes, no problem.
Sorry, Les.
Yeah, I believe it would work.
Yeah.
I think that's the only way forward. I've spent most of my life paying for World War II, so it isn't really a problem that in terms of where we go with that one.
In times of a crisis, then, you think we borrow for the future?
I think we need to, as long as that money is invested wisely, and I think that's where the future of our energy supplies needs to be seriously looked at.
OK, Neil, and you run a cafe on the high street. She said yesterday her plan is to deliver. When you think about levelling up the Northern powerhouse, do your punters believe her?
No, they really don't. We need to... Somebody's actually going to do something. You know, we've been waiting with promises, like you said, deliver. We need, whatever political party we are, they need to do something. And they need to do it quickly. Otherwise, well, you know, we're not that long off a general election. So we need it done, you know, sooner rather than later, just to help us all, really.
And finally, we're in Lee because this is one of those seats that when it turned to the Conservatives, it was a real shock.
Yeah.
What will happen next time, or do you think all of the votes are now up for grabs?
I think all the votes are up for grabs because promises, you know, have not been delivered. You know, it's just, we need action now, really, you know, for all the high streets up and down the country. You know, we need help, we do desperately need support.
And as you said earlier, there's no point in you having a business if your customers can't afford to buy your products. Thank you, and thank you, Les. I'm sorry for making you hold my microphone. The interesting thing, speaking to lots of voters yesterday out and about in Lee, was that many of them weren't quite sure what was going on, and that's not just in Lee, that's many parts of the UK I've been to. And it's not necessarily about Liz Truss, it's not necessarily about Boris Johnson, it's just that they feel there's been such a churn in politics, they feel disconnected from it. And so perhaps one of the biggest challenges for Liz Truss and for her government is to restore a little bit more engagement.
OK, Nina, for now, thanks very much indeed. If you need a microphone, Nina, I reckon there's about 855 here because the media from around the world are here, so we'll whiz one to you. Thanks for now. We'll speak to you again a bit later and your guests. How are the other political parties going to deal with a change of Prime Minister, a change of Conservative leader? Let's ask one of them, shall we? Because we're joined now live on Breakfast by the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I mean, you wanted Boris Johnson gone. He's about to leave. Are you prepared to give Liz Truss the benefit of the doubt to start with?
Well, I listened to her over the Conservative leadership contest over the past few weeks, and I was shocked
that there was no plan from her. There was no plan for the NHS, there's no plan for skyrocketing energy bills and food bills. And I was really worried. There are millions of pensioners and families who've been really worried about the NHS waiting list, about how they're going to pay their energy bills. And there's been no plan emerge. It's either she doesn't seem to get it or she doesn't care, and that's just not acceptable.
Or she was waiting to win and get the job and move in, look through the books and then finalise things, because we understand she's going to release a plan, and it looks like a very big plan on Thursday with a freeze on energy bills, the kind of thing that you were talking about.
Well, you're right. The Liberal Democrats were the first party to call for a price freeze so that the cap stays where it is and people's energy bills don't go up this autumn. And the Liberal Democrats are proud of that, and we said we should pay for it with a windfall tax on the oil and gas companies. But what we're hearing from Downing Street, what you were referring to, isn't a freeze, it's a loan. What they're saying is that families and pensioners should be paying this back for years to come. That's just not right. We should be asking the oil and gas companies, who are making tens of billions of pounds in profit they never expected to make because Putin invaded Ukraine, we should be asking them to pay some of that back so that we can afford to freeze people's bills without actually having the loan system that it's rumoured that Liz Truss wants.
Is that what you are expecting her to introduce, that when she makes this announcement on Thursday, that it is this freeze in energy bills, maybe till the end of this Parliament for the next couple of years, which is then spread over the future, that people kind of pay back over the next 10, 15 years? Is that what your understanding is?
Well, we just don't know. I mean, this is my whole point. She's had weeks to tell us during the leadership election for the Tory party, and she didn't spell it out. In fact, she said she wasn't going to do anything. And that is just unacceptable. There are not just millions of families who are worried about how they're going to pay those bills. There are businesses who want to invest, but the uncertainty and the fear of higher energy bills has meant those businesses are in trouble. So the Conservatives and Liz Truss have left people in this limbo, in this uncertainty, and it looks like if this plan of a loan it transpires, that they've not even developed an acceptable plan for the future. So Liberal Democrats are really worried. We put forward our alternative, our constructive alternative, which would be a genuine freeze on people's bills, paid for by one-off tax on the oil and gas companies who are making these super profits. That seems a fair approach. It can work. I just wish the Conservatives would listen to this type of approach, which I think would help those millions of families and pensioners who are so worried.
We've spoken before about what some people see as the pitfalls of a windfall tax. I don't want to get into that this morning, but I suppose there is a question for you, that if there is a new Prime Minister, a change of regime with a big policy that people think is going to help them, there is a risk for you as opposition parties here, isn't it, about knowing how to respond? How do you deal with a new Prime Minister? Are you a bit rattled, a bit worried about Liz Truss?
Not at all. To be honest, it's the Conservative Party that is the problem here. When we beat the Conservative Party in 3 by-elections in the last year, in True Blue Buckinghamshire, in North Shropshire, where we took a seat the Tories had held for 200 years, or in East Devon early this summer, overturning the largest majority ever overturned, we talked to lifelong Conservative voters. And it wasn't about actually Boris Johnson, it was about the Conservative Party. They feel the Conservative Party has taken them for granted, doesn't have an answer to the problems in the NHS, to the problems with higher inflation, and they were rejecting the Conservative Party. So, of course, we want there to be real help for people. That's why the Liberal Democrats have set out our very carefully constructed plan that's costed to freeze people's bills and pay for it with a windfall tax. It is a clear, fair plan, but we're not hearing that from the Conservatives. And it reflects what people told us in those by-elections when we beat the Conservatives. They feel the Conservatives don't get it or don't care. And our country deserves better than that.
Sir Ed Davey from the Liberal Democrats, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Joining us now in Westminster, 2 people who are watching closely the developments across Westminster today. We've got the Spectator's Katie Balls and Sonia Soda from The Observer. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
For people who are sitting at home watching this on telly, what do you feel here? Give us a sense of the feeling in Downing Street this morning, Sonia.
Well, I think there's some big question marks, obviously, hanging on Liz Truss. She's inheriting a really, really difficult in-tray. And there are some big questions about exactly what she's going to do to ease the cost of living crisis. And so I think in the coming days, people will be really expecting her to set out exactly what it is she's going to do. Is she talking about freezing prices for 4 to 6 months, or is it for longer? Is it freezing wholesale prices, or is it freezing the bills that people pay? So I think there's going to be a lot of detail that comes out over the next few days, and that's going to be what people are really focused on.
Katie, I mean, often a new Prime Minister has a honeymoon period. It's hard to think of the word honeymoon in relation to what Liz Truss faces in the next few days and weeks.
Yeah, I think if you look at where the Conservatives are in the polls, there's now, Labour are consistently ahead. You look at the in-tray that Sonia's just mentioned, and I think the fact that also just in terms of her own party, by historical standards, she has fewer MPs backing her than Theresa May and Boris Johnson did in the parliamentary round of the contest. The margin of victory she had even with the membership is lower. I think it's even Ian Duncan Smith received a higher margin from the membership, and you had all those things, and it is a really tricky inheritance. There's a question of how is she going to pull this party together, how is she going to deal with the economic situation, and therefore even if she does get a bounce, it's hard to see it being a period where one would even think about having an early election, in the sense that some leaders think, this is a good time for me. It's hard to imagine that here.
It would have to be a mighty big bounce. Sonia, we're talking there to Ed Davey about how the Liberal Democrats, but also how other opposition parties handle this moment, because Boris Johnson has just dominated politics for the last 3 years. How do they tweak their response? Is it more than a tweak? Is it a reset for all of them?
Well, I think the really key thing to watch will be what does Liz Truss say she's going to do about the cost of living crisis. So, for example, over the summer, you had Labour come out with their big idea, which was an energy price freeze, a bill price freeze. And so if Liz Truss basically comes out and says she's going to do that, their line up till now has been, where's the government? We've got a plan, the government hasn't got a plan. They're going to have to adjust their messaging around that. And I think same for the Lib Dems. The Lib Dems also had a plan. Once Liz Truss has come out with hers, they're going to sort of have to adapt their messaging.
I was going to say potentially stealing their thunder, but I don't think we should talk about thunder today, because there's talk of an almighty storm here this afternoon, which is political metaphors are us. Katie, let's talk about Boris Johnson. We're expecting him to come out in the next sort of half hour or so and give his final address to the nation. What kind of tone do you think we can expect from him? How will he want to be remembered at this moment?
I think he's trying to carve out his legacy while also leaving the doors, slightly open, not completely ruling out a comeback in the future. We know that he prefers Liz Truss as his successor over Rishi Sunak. I don't think he was particularly subtle about that. Neither were his supporters, Nadine Dorries, Jacob Rees-Mogg. And therefore, you do get the sense that he wants to give Liz Truss some space to establish herself. But as you say, he's a huge personality who dominates politics. He plans to stay in the Commons, all the signs so far suggest. And therefore, even if he ducks out of the party conference, which is the suggestion from his team, how long does he really stop making these interventions? If he has a regular column, that's one thing being discussed. If he publishes his memoirs in the not too distant future, you can start to see how, for all the talk of politics about Boris Johnson, I'm not sure we're actually going to get there anytime soon.
What do you expect from him today, Sonia? How's he going to use this moment standing right where we are?
Well, I think he probably will he won't say too much today. He'll talk about his own legacy. I think that's what we can expect. That's what Prime Ministers normally do. But I think it's interesting. There's a lot of chatter at the moment on, amongst Conservative Party members who feel actually like they didn't really want him to go. And we've got to remember it was Conservative ministers resigning en masse, which led to Boris Johnson's resignation. So I think the chances of him making a comeback, are zero, essentially. But I think one thing that's going to make Liz Truss's life quite difficult over the coming months is that idea that he might make a comeback isn't quite going to go away. And you've got a lot of MPs on the backbenches at the moment who are worried about losing their seats in the next election because the economic outlook is so grim, and unhappy backbench MPs, some of whom didn't back Liz Truss, some of whom may have a soft spot for Boris Johnson. That's not going to make for a calm atmosphere in the Conservative Party.
Katie, very quickly, do you agree he ain't really coming back?
I think it's tricky for all the support for Boris Johnson to come back, of which there is some in the membership and some amongst his MPs. There's also a large number of MPs who were really unhappy with the end of his premiership and thought there was just a scandal-ridden number 10. And therefore, I think you could have a situation where people try and push Liz Truss out, but once again, we'll be back to a similar situation as summer. No one can quite agree what should come next.
OK, thank you both very much indeed. Are you going to reserve your spaces? Because, yeah, you need to throw down a jacket or a coat or something. It's going to get very busy here, isn't it, this morning? Sharp elbows, that's how you do it.
We've got sharp elbows, haven't we?
I think we're going to have to crouch down and get out of the way as well. Thank you both very much indeed. All change at Downing Street, all change in the weather as well. And I said that Boris Johnson is going to be thinking and looking at the forecast, because the forecast for Downing Street this morning and for Liz Truss this afternoon for her speech, crucial. Let's check in with Matt. Morning.
Good morning, John. Yes, it certainly is, isn't it? It's been some quite lovely weather of late. This swirl of cloud here responsible for it. One batch of cloud working its way northwards, but it has meant for this morning, at least at Downing Street, it is looking dry. We'll see some sunny spells, but showers will gradually develop as we go through the morning into the afternoon, by which point they could become heavy and thundery. Interesting flight, though, up to Balmoral potentially. Some fairly bumpy conditions, especially as it gets close to Balmoral from mid-morning onwards. Whilst it's dry at the moment, increasing chance of some showers and thunderstorms from around mid-morning onwards. So that could prove quite interesting itself, and some breezy conditions to go with it as well. And as I said, return to London later, the risk of some further storms. In fact, chance of some thunderstorms across many parts of the UK today. Not quite the intensity that we saw last night, but compared with yesterday, where many places spent the day dry, a greater chance of having at least one part of the day wet. Here's a line of showers and thunderstorms last night as they worked their way northwards and eastwards across England in particular. Notice how the lightning flashes have faded as we've gone into the morning. The area of rain has fragmented somewhat. It's now pushing its way towards Scotland. But, as I said, it's that which will gradually work its way towards Balmoral during the middle part of the morning. A few showers now developing to the south and west. Quite a mild morning out there, though, it has to be said. Temperatures in the mid-teens once again. But just notice how those showers across southern areas start to blossom a bit more to life. The rain across northern Scotland becomes a bit more heavy, persistent, with the rumbles of thunder. Quite breezy to north of it, breezy to the south and the west. A scattering of showers across many areas. Best chance of staying dry for longest, if not all day long, Northern Ireland, southern Scotland and into northern England this afternoon. As I said, breezy to the northwest, to the northeast and the southwest. Temperatures down a little bit on yesterday's values, but still pleasant enough in those sunny moments between the downpours. Could finish the day with some rather nasty storms towards East Anglia and the southeast. They will clear through, and then it's ice to Scotland tonight for some of the heaviest and most persistent rain, again with the risk of lightning and thunder. A few showers dotted around further south tonight, more particularly to southern and western coasts, and temperatures again tonight sitting in the mid-teens for many. Another pretty mild and muggy night to take us into Wednesday. Now, this is a big chart for Wednesday. Low pressure has been sat to the southwest of us for the past few days, slowly now started to make a move eastwards. What that does mean, though, showers possible just about anywhere. Windy towards the south and the west first thing, and in the north of Scotland, where we'll see the more persistent rain. Some sunny conditions developing for a time during the morning, then a rash of showers. Showers could come and go all day long for some of you. One or two spots staying largely dry. Pleasant enough in the sunshine, but as our area of low pressure starts to push its way eastwards, gradually through Thursday into Friday, whilst it's still got some showers around, it will start to feel that bit cooler. That's how it's looking. Sally, back to you.
Matt, thanks very much indeed. Now, Jon is here to tell us all about the sports news this morning. And Jon, I'm really interested to know what you think might be going on with Rafa Nadal at the moment. He was
really cryptic,
a bit mysterious,
as we'll hear after going out. Yeah, it's a strange one. I think it seems there's stuff going on away from tennis potentially for him at the moment.
He's not happy, is he?
But yeah, he didn't seem in a great place, it's fair to say. So perhaps something going on, with his family or behind the scenes. I don't know. I don't want to kind of overstate it, but yeah, he just seemed very flat afterwards, as we'll see. Yeah. In his post-match press conference after exiting at the US Open. We now know there will be a new first-time champion in the men's singles after Rafa's exit. He said his mind was certainly on other matters after this defeat. It came...
Congrats to him, wish him all the very best. I need to go back, I need to fix things, life, and then I don't know when I gonna come back. I gonna try to be ready mentally. When I feel that I will be ready to compete again, I will be there.
So there we go. Now, what a year it's already been for Welsh football. The men's side heading to their first World Cup in 64 years. Now, the women's team have a chance tonight to move into the playoffs of World Cup qualifying 2, a match against Slovenia, the biggest, it's fair to say, in their history. Wales have never qualified for a major tournament, and we'll see a record attendance at the Cardiff City Stadium, nearly 12,000 fans, more than double their previous record. And all they need is a point, just a draw, to get to the next stage after beating Greece last Friday.
The belief that I have, the staff have in the team, is something that we've had from day one. So game 10 doesn't excite me any more than any of the others did, because we do very much focus on what we need to do to perform, and that's really important to us. So I'm happy to, I'm happy that if the fans think that, then they can get excited around that. But I'm very much focused on what I want this team to do, and it's to do the best they can so that we can qualify for tournaments consistently, because that's what we need to do.
Yes, well, what a night ahead. Scotland are already sure of their playoff place, but play Faroe Islands. Northern Ireland go to Latvia, while England are back on home soil for the first time since beating Germany to win the European Championships. What an occasion it'll be in front of a sellout crowd of around 30,000 at Stoke City Stadium. With World Cup qualification already secure, they face Luxembourg, who, it's worth pointing out, England beat 10-0 last time. So you can imagine, in front of that crowd, what an occasion after the highs of the summer.
I was just going to say, our expectations are now really high, aren't they?
A little bit, but they were very relaxed, very chilled when they kind of got the job done to actually qualify outright, to go to the World Cup. And you kind of think now, I mean, with the pressure off and tonight, what an occasion.
Who knows? John, thank you very much indeed. We are back in Downing Street in just a couple of minutes. Of course, we will be seeing Boris Johnson leave number 10 around 7:30 this morning. We will take that moment live. In fact, we can go to Downing Street now, to number 10. I think they bring the podium out. That's where he will stand, say a few words. He will make a statement. We know that. 7:30 this morning. You can watch it here on BBC Breakfast. Then he will leave and go to Balmoral and officially resign, offer his resignation to the Queen. All of that coming up live on the programme. But now it's time for the news, the travel and the weather, where you are.
Hello there, good morning. Welcome to Downing Street. BBC Breakfast coming from here this morning with me, Jon Kay. On the day our new Prime Minister is appointed, Sally is in the studio in Salford. So here are our headlines this morning. Liz Truss will be handed the keys to number 10 this afternoon after beating Conservative leadership rival Rishi Sunak to the top job. But first, Boris Johnson will be giving his final speech here, just a couple of metres from our cameras, in the next few minutes. Then he will fly to Balmoral to meet the Queen, and that's where he will formally resign. We're going to bring you all of this live on the programme in the next half hour. Stay with us. And we're also going to look at what's in Liz Truss's very full in tray. When she walks through this famous black door this afternoon, the stuff she's going to have to deal with. And number one priority, those soaring energy bills.
Also this morning, one of two suspects in Sunday's mass stabbings in Western Canada has been found dead. The other remains at large.
And in sport this morning, as Rafa Nadal falls at...
Plus, after another night of spectacular storms, it's sunshine and thundery showers across the UK today. I'll have the details on when you can expect them. All coming up here on Breakfast.
Good morning. Welcome to Downing Street. Tuesday, the 6th of September, and our main story, well, no surprise, we're in Downing Street because in the next few hours, everything changes. Number 10 gets its new resident. Liz Truss was elected leader of the Conservative Party yesterday. But before she takes over, Boris Johnson has to leave Downing Street. And in the next few minutes, we're expecting he will walk out of that door for the final time before going to Balmoral. There we go. The podium has just been set up in the last few minutes. We've had the whole testing, 1, 2, 3 things. The microphone's working. It's in the right spot, perfectly framed. The weather is holding off at the moment. There'd been worries about storms this morning. That would have been some end to the Boris Johnson years, wouldn't it? But it's OK for now. So he'll come out here and speak very shortly. We'll hear his words and reflect on his premiership, but also look ahead to the massive challenges for our new Prime Minister. Let's get this summary now from our political correspondent, Ian Watson.
In one day, we'll hear from two Prime Ministers. In this street, a transfer of power will take place without a general election. Early this morning, Boris Johnson will give his final speech as Prime Minister. Then late this afternoon, Liz Truss, his successor, chosen by Conservative members, will set out her stall. But what will happen in between? The Queen is still in residence at Balmoral, so Boris Johnson will fly to Scotland to resign, and Liz Truss will make the same journey to be asked by the Queen to form a government. Then she'll get the keys to Downing Street and get to work.
I campaigned as a Conservative, and I will govern as a Conservative. And my friends, we need to show that we will deliver over the next 2 years. I will deliver a bold plan to cut taxes and grow our economy. I will deliver on the energy crisis, dealing with people's energy bills, but also dealing with the long-term issues we have on energy supply.
She'll announce her new cabinet, the very top jobs in government, this evening. The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, is likely to move next door to her at number 11 Downing Street as Chancellor. Former leadership candidate Suella Braverman seems set to become Home Secretary. And Education Secretary James Cleverly is expected to take over from Liz Truss at the Foreign Office. Liz Truss will face daunting challenges on multiple fronts. A substantial NHS backlog even before we reach winter. A war in Europe with the need for continued support for Ukraine. And at the very summit of our overflowing in tray, the cost of living crisis and burgeoning energy bills.
There can be no justification for not freezing energy prices. There's a political consensus that that needs to happen. She needs to answer the question, how's she going to pay for that? Labour have been clear it needs to be a windfall tax on oil and gas companies. So she needs to show that she actually understands and can meet the challenges that are there after 12 years of failure of this Tory government.
Liz Truss has proved she can run a successful campaign, but running a government, especially in times like these, well, that will be a more testing challenge. Ian Watson, BBC News, Westminster.
And just at this very moment, going into Downing Street this morning, Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries on the right, and Boris Johnson's sister Rachel in the navy dress going in there. So family and close political colleagues and friends going into Downing Street. They will all emerge shortly. We've seen other members of the cabinet lining up down the road. They'll be ushered into position for Boris Johnson to deliver his final speech. So let's just run you through the next few hours, because this is what you need to know. So we think that speech will be at about 7:30, so in the next 20 minutes. But that said, I don't know, there's a sort of buzz and anticipation here which suggests it might be a little bit earlier. The podium's come out sooner than we thought, but certainly that in the next few minutes outside the door of number 10. Boris Johnson then will leave Downing Street, and rather than going to Buckingham Palace, which is what would normally happen for a departing Prime Minister to see the Queen, he's going to see her at Balmoral, where she's spending the summer. That is where Boris Johnson formally resigns. Liz Truss then goes in separately to Balmoral. She meets the Queen, who asks her to form a government, and that is the moment when Liz Truss officially becomes Prime Minister. That didn't happen officially, constitutionally, yesterday when she was elected by the Conservative Party. That only happens at lunchtime today. Then Liz Truss returns to Downing Street, walks up the street here to deliver her first speech this afternoon, brackets weather permitting, because there's thunder and lightning. Political metaphors insert here. And then following that, it's expected the new Prime Minister will start appointing her cabinet straight to work, thinking of that energy bill policy announced on Thursday. And then she's got Prime Minister's questions in at the deep end tomorrow lunchtime down at the House of Commons. So all of that in the next few hours. The noise volumes rising here as the photographers elbow one another to get the perfect position to get their shot. Nick Eardley, our chief political correspondent, is with me here in Downing Street to talk us through this morning. Should we talk about Boris Johnson first? Because how does he use this moment, his final act as Prime Minister? How does he pitch this?
Well, I mean, it's basically his farewell speech. So I reckon in about half an hour's time you're going to hear Boris Johnson talk about what he thinks his achievements are. He will probably talk about Brexit, Ukraine, the vaccine against COVID, and he'll probably urge his party to unite as well. We've seen a pretty fractured Conservative Party over the last few weeks, over the last few years as well, and I think we'll get something of a message like that from him as well. He'll be surrounded by his cabinet down there. We'll see, I think, some of his close family and friends just there. Interesting to see Nadine Dorries just go in the door. That'll be her last time. She's leaving cabinet in about an hour's time. She's going to resign when Boris Johnson goes, potentially to head to the House of Lords. That's not been confirmed, but there's a lot of speculation about that. We're going to see a lot of changes at the cabinet table. Priti Patel's going to be out as well, the Home Secretary. We're going to see Kwasi Kwarteng, a close ally of Liz Truss, move in to number 11. So this is a big day of political change. It's a day of political theatre. And then this afternoon we get the political vision from Liz Truss, where she sets out what she wants to do with power.
And we've said that Downing Street is full of energy this morning, full of anticipation. But energy is the word, isn't it? Energy bills, energy costs. That is her first and foremost priority as she takes over. Straight away.
As we've been saying since yesterday morning, it's absolutely the issue that's going to define Liz Truss's early period in power. She's going to give a big speech later this week where she will talk about exactly what she wants to do. Been chatting to her team this morning, and they're saying that the final details of what that's going to be haven't been signed off. But I would expect it to involve a price freeze of some sort, probably funded by loans to energy companies, which would be paid off over a fairly long period of time, maybe 10 or 20 years. That won't be welcomed by everybody. Some Tories don't like the idea. They think that universal support is a bad idea. Some in the Labour Party, the SNP and the Liberal Democrats say that you should tax the big oil and gas companies instead to make sure that the money's coming from the people who are profiting from high energy prices. But I think, Liz Truss over the last few weeks has pitched herself as a low tax, small state Tory. I think what we're going to see from her this week is, yes, some commitments to lower taxes, but also some pretty big interventions, some pretty big spending as well.
Yeah. Nick and I are going to get tangled up here because there's a man with an important cable that's going to allow us to hear, hear Boris Johnson, but it's like that cat's cradle game, isn't it?
We're skipping
all
here.
Covered in bits of Bits of cable. We'll be fine. We'll get through this. In the next few minutes, we'll hear from Boris Johnson, but there's lots of other important news around this morning. So let's go back to Sally in the studio, and we'll see you again in a few minutes. Hi, Sal.
John, thanks very much indeed. We'll talk to you again very, very soon. In other news, a man thought to be in his 20s has died after being shot by police following a pursuit yesterday evening. The Metropolitan Police say he was travelling in a vehicle which was stopped in the Streatham Hill area of South London. He was airlifted to hospital where he later died. The Independent Office for Police Conduct have launched an independent investigation. One of two men accused of killing 10 people in a series of mass stabbings in Western Canada has been found dead. Damien Sanderson's body was found in the James Smith Cree Nation, while his brother Miles Sanderson remains at large. The attacks, which left another 18 people injured, are some of the worst acts of violence in Canada's recent history. Now, detectives investigating the fatal shooting of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool have been given a further 36 hours to question 3 suspects. A 34-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder in the early hours of Sunday. 2 other men, aged 29 and 41, are also being held on suspicion of assisting an offender. Olivia was shot in her home 15 days ago as her mother tried to stop a gunman from entering. Ukraine says the last working reactor at the occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant has been disconnected from the national grid because Russian shelling triggered a fire there. Moscow denies any involvement. The UN nuclear watchdog said the reactor was still providing power to keep the facility safe. Now, the Duchess of Sussex has given her first speech here in the UK since she stepped down as a working royal. She was speaking in Manchester last night at a global summit for young people. When she was speaking, Meghan told the audience about her own struggle for self-belief. Prince Harry accompanied her to the event. It is actually their first visit to the UK since the Platinum Jubilee in early June. And our correspondent Judith Morris, who was there at the event last night, spoke to people who had been in the audience. They received a rapturous welcome last night. Lots of people posing for selfies, taking pictures, trying to talk to both of them last night. And a 7-minute speech from Meghan, during which, as I said just then, she talked about finding her self-belief. That speech last night in Manchester. It is 13 minutes past 7. Of course, all eyes this morning are on Downing Street, where there is a major transition of power about to happen. Really historic moments coming up in the next hour or so. Let's go straight back to John.
Yes, Sally, we understand that Boris and Carrie Johnson are now back inside number 10 Downing Street. We think they've been staying in Chequers, the Prime Minister's country residence, for the last week or so, having taken all their belongings out. But they're back here at the moment, saying goodbye to staff. Friends and family are gathering inside, and then we expect him to leave in the next few minutes. In fact, I've just seen somebody come out with the pieces of paper, look a bit like this, and they put them on the podium. So his speech is, we think, ready for him there, so it could happen, his farewell, any moment now. But when we get that new Prime Minister, when Liz Truss arrives this afternoon, how do the opposition deal with her new policies? How do they handle this new era in British politics? We can speak now to Labour's Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, who joins us on Breakfast. Good morning to you, Angela. Thanks for joining us. Can we start on energy bills? Because it's the only thing people care about right now, isn't it? A lot of people have been waiting to find out what Liz Truss will do. And it sounds like, if the rumours are true, she's going to freeze bills for the next couple of years, maybe even going further than you have been calling for. So I'm assuming you will welcome that.
Well, people are absolutely petrified about the energy bills that are coming their way. Businesses are as well, and we've needed an answer to this, and it's urgent that Liz Truss deals with this immediately. We've said there should be an energy freeze. We've also said that we should pay for that by a windfall tax on the gas and energy companies, oil companies that have made huge profits. Liz Truss has not said that, and the concern is how we pay for that when national debt is going up, and the people that are working hard in this country seem to be paying the most, and that doesn't seem to be any different under Liz Truss, who has of course been part of Boris Johnson's cabinet for the last number of years.
But if she announces that she's freezing bills, and that's what so many people, millions of families across the country are waiting to hear, if she does that, that could be a political game changer for you. How do you deal with that as Labour?
Well, Labour's been leading the way on this. Of course, when Rishi Sunak was in the Treasury, we called for a windfall tax and support for families and for energy bills back last year, and they did that eventually. And Labour's been calling for this now for months, and now the government hopefully will do something about it. But once again, businesses and households have been panicking and worrying about what's going to happen, and this government has been behind the curve on it, and they still don't seem to have the answers about how they're going to tackle inequality, which has grown in the UK under the Conservatives, and really have a more medium-term plan on how we're going to deal with energy. We can't just keep capping and windfall taxing. We have to deal with renewables, which the government have failed to invest in. We have to look at insulating homes so that people are more self-reliant on making sure their energy costs are coming down, and this government haven't had a plan for that. So we can't just keep blundering from one crisis to the next. We've got to have long-term solutions, and Labour have those solutions and have put forward those plans. I haven't seen any of that from the government, including this new Prime Minister.
Thursday, we assume, is when we're going to get those firm plans from Liz Truss. That's what we understand. Now, as I'm speaking to you, Angela Rayner, Downing Street is buzzing. Boris Johnson's best mates and colleagues and family are coming out of number 10, and they're all gathering here to make his last few comments, his farewell speech. We're seeing their friends, family, backbench MPs all come to see him off and wave him goodbye, and no doubt there'll be lots more here this afternoon when Liz Truss takes over and succeeds him. I mean, as a prominent female, the most prominent female Labour politician, do you look at the Conservative Party and say, look, this is their third female leader, their third female Prime Minister? Labour have never had a permanent female leader. Do you look at this and think, you know, where are we and Labour going wrong?
Well, I look at the last couple of weeks where we've seen Boris Johnson going around having his holidays, enjoying himself, when the rest of the country have been absolutely petrified. I've got businesses locally who have been there since pre-war who are now saying that they will not be able to survive. We've got households that are struggling. To be honest, most people in this country at the moment are looking at that and thinking, so what? What are you going to do to help the people of this country? You know, they're really struggling at the moment. So, yeah, it's great that all his mates are there to see him off and it's all buzzing there, but the rest of the country isn't buzzing. The rest of the country is looking at backlog Britain. They're seeing that things are taking longer for them to get things done. The public services are collapsing at the moment. The NHS is struggling. You know, trying to get your passport, trying to get your driving licence. All of the government departments are really struggling at the moment because, quite frankly, the government have done nothing to support them over the summer, and over the last couple of years they've been distracted by sleaze and by scandal, and so therefore it's great that we've got a woman Prime Minister, but what we really want to see is action to support people of this country.
Angela Rayner from Labour, thanks for joining us on Breakfast this morning.
Thank you.
Tell you what, the energy levels here in Downing Street are rising by the moment as we wait for Boris Johnson to appear from the front door for the last time and to give his speech. We can see that his friends and family are gathering, some of them coming out of number 11 and waiting on the steps of number 11 Downing Street. A little bit further down the road there, just beyond the podium, you can see some of his Conservative backbenchers who are gathering. And there's Rachel Johnson, the Prime Minister's sister, again with Nadine Dorries in the trainers, the Culture Secretary, taking their places down there in that group. A lot of people here. For them, a lot of them, of course, for those really close to Boris Johnson, his family, his friends, the people who've been with him throughout this, it's a sad day. We know how loyal and what a close friend Nadine Dorries is. So for them, they'll be sorry to see him go. They regret what has happened. But the Conservative Party at the same time resetting under Liz Truss, and we know there was a majority of MPs in the end who wanted to get rid of him. So how is he going to use this moment? How is he going to use his final speech here in the next few moments at that podium? How does he make use of this to try and determine how we all remember him and his 3 years inside that famous house? And what clues might he give us about how he faces the future, about his own plans, how he will behave as an ex-Prime Minister. We've been talking this morning about how troublesome former PMs can be to new incumbents. What's he planning to do? How's he planning to behave? Will he be the jokey Boris Johnson, the boosterish Boris Johnson that we sometimes see? Or will he play it straight? And will this be a more formal farewell? We'll find out in the next few minutes. I've never seen so many MPs with cameras and phones at the ready, getting their selfies to take that picture of the last moment they were there with Boris Johnson. Nick Eardley, our chief political correspondent, is with us. Some of them do look quite emotional there, Nick. Hugging, kissing and looking, very sorry.
Well, look, a lot of the politicians that you can see on screen just now have been prominent supporters of Boris Johnson for some time. Their political careers have been linked to the rise of Boris Johnson. People like Nadine Dorries, who wanted him to be Prime Minister for some time. Her cabinet career is over now. She's going to resign as soon as Boris Johnson does. So yes, for a lot of these politicians, this is an emotional moment. They don't think it needed to happen. They're angry that their party brought the Prime Minister down. But fundamentally, Boris Johnson is now out of power. He will be out of office in a few minutes' time. I think in the next few minutes, what we'll hear from him is, yes, a bit of a valedictory, talking about what he did in power, what he thinks his achievements are, but also a bit of a plea for unity with his party. You know, we know that the country is facing economic turbulence, some really tough times. We know that over the next few weeks and months, the cost of living is going to be the dominating issue. And I think you'll hear from Boris Johnson a bit of a pledge to, or a bit of a plea, I should say, for his party to reunite, to get behind his successor, Liz Truss, and to allow her to get on with the business of governing. You know, for the last few months on Breakfast, in fact, do you know what? For the last few years on Breakfast, we've been covering almost every week the turbulence in the Conservative Party. I don't think that's over by any stretch of the imagination, but I think you'll hear Boris Johnson make a plea to his MPs to allow the new Prime Minister to get on with the job and to deal with the economic crisis.
It's almost as interesting looking at these pictures of who's here as who's not here. It's hard to assess when we're looking at the crowds, but I'm trying to work out if there are any, is Michael Gove? Does Michael Gove come up and say farewell today?
I suspect
some
we won't see Michael
personal
Gove.
relationships here.
We won't see Michael Gove today would be my bet. I'm not sure if he'll have been invited. The relationship there has not recovered since he was sacked on one of Boris Johnson's last moves before he announced his plan to resign. But there are several cabinet ministers down there. I can see Jacob Rees-Mogg, I can see the Scottish Secretary, Alistair Jack, the Leader of the Commons, Mark Spencer, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace. You know, a lot of people who have had their political... Shailesh Vara, you can see on his phone there. He's the Northern Ireland Secretary who's not been in post for long. Don't think he'll be in post by the end of the week.
Making most of this moment, getting his pictures.
He's getting his video in while he can. But yes, you've got, a lot of the cabinet there, a lot of people who are sad to see Boris Johnson go. It's interesting actually talking to Tory MPs over the last few weeks, over the summer. There was a bit of a sense, I think, of buyer's remorse that, some were quite regretful that Mr Johnson had been brought down. And, some hoping maybe that we've not seen the last of him. But his message, I think, in the next few minutes is going to be about, yes, what he's done in power, yes, what he considers his achievements to be, but also what needs to happen now. And the country facing inflation going up, facing these high energy bills, facing the prospect of a pretty serious recession. It's a serious moment for the country, and I think the Prime Minister will probably want to reflect that as he leaves Number 10 for the last time.
If you're watching these pictures and wondering where the Prime Minister-elect Liz Truss is, she's not here. I suppose we wouldn't expect her to be here. She doesn't want to be the focus of attention today, but I wonder what she will be thinking watching this, because she's not going to have much time to enjoy her arrival, is she? She's going to be straight up there into her office and dealing with, we've talked about this groaning in trade, just the biggest issues.
I remember standing here just over 3 years ago when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister and saying what a daunting in trade he has, trying to get a new Brexit deal and then force it through Parliament. He had a few weeks and ultimately it proved a few months to do that. Liz Truss has a couple of days before she needs to sell her vision to the country of how she's going to help with the cost of living. We'll start to see some of that this afternoon. She'll want to give us her big pitch for power. But in terms of the specifics, we'll probably see them on Thursday. And that is not long to finish off a plan that is going to have to help millions of people and thousands of businesses through what is going to be a really turbulent winter. I think it's going to be a big plan. I think it's going to involve a lot of money. I think it's going to involve some sort of energy price freeze, the current cap being kept in place in some form or another. But that's going to happen immediately. She really has to get the ground running. So when we see her this afternoon, that vision she sets out as the new Prime Minister is a really big moment for her, and she won't have long to get going.
And we've heard from voters in Lee in Greater Manchester talking to us this morning, a Tory win seat at the last election, but saying to Nina, I don't really care who is Prime Minister, I just want to know what they're going to do to help me. What are they going to do for my bills? How are they going to bring down inflation? That's the only thing that matters to me right now. So all of this is kind of interesting telly. It's a moment in history, but there are more pressing matters, aren't there, for real lives?
I think that's absolutely right, and I suspect a lot of people watching at home will be thinking the exact same thing. And that is where the attention will turn this afternoon. You know, there is no doubt that the one thing Liz Truss will be pressed on time and time again over the next few weeks and months is the economy and the cost of living crisis. And as I say, I think we'll hear a bit of that from Boris Johnson, actually. The impression I get, speaking to people around him over the last few days, is the severity of the crisis is well understood in Number 10, even by the outgoing administration. So I wouldn't be surprised if he talks a bit about that. But look, Westminster is a place that moves really quickly. And what we hear over the next few minutes will really matter in terms of how Boris Johnson's remembered, his own vision of what he delivered in power over the last 3 years. But ultimately, what matters today is what we hear this afternoon from the new Prime Minister and what we hear from her over the next few days about how she's going to tackle the cost of living crisis.
2 minutes, we're told. 2 minutes. There's Grant Shapps, Transport Secretary. Who else have we got?
Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack in there, Jacob Rees-Mogg.
And his son, that's Jacob Rees-Mogg's
his children.
He's brought his child here to enjoy this moment. And we understand that Jacob Rees-Mogg will be back in a Liz Truss cabinet, we're assuming.
The latest I've heard is there's a good chance he will be the business secretary. He's been involved in a lot of those meetings over the last few days with energy companies, talking about the big plan that Ms Truss has to freeze prices, talking about how that's going to work in practice. So there are a few faces in that crowd that are likely to still be in cabinet by the end of today, by tomorrow as well. Alistair Jack, for example, good chance of staying the Scottish Secretary, maybe a job for Grant Shapps. I think that's still being worked out this afternoon. But yeah, look, people who have been key parts of Boris Johnson's administration, key parts of his political career, his political rise. And in the next few seconds, we're now going to hear from Boris Johnson about his vision of, or his valedictory of what he's done over the last few years, a plea for unity in his party and for a chance for the new Prime Minister to get on with what is a daunting job.
Yes, suddenly it's got a bit quieter here. There's a bit of a hush outside that famous black door. And everybody's assuming that Prime Minister Boris Johnson is about to walk out of the front door, come up to the podium and give that valedictory address, that speech where he sums up what he says he's achieved and gives us a sense of how he hopes to be remembered. It's interesting, Nick, looking at the Conservative Party representatives who are here from different parts of the party, divided on Brexit, divided on what to do about the economy and the cost of living. How Liz Truss holds this party together going forward, because whatever she does, and if this energy plan is as big as is being mooted, there are a lot of people probably in this street right now who don't like it.
Well, look, if it is universal, which is what we're expecting.
Well, so everyone gets the help, yeah.
Everybody gets the help. In fact, here's the black door opening.
Door opens.
Here's Boris Johnson and his wife, Carrie.
Thank you. Well, this is it, folks. Thank you, everybody, for coming out so early this morning. In only a couple of hours, I will be in Balmoral to see Her Majesty the Queen. And the torch will finally be passed to a new Conservative leader. The baton will be handed over in what has unexpectedly turned out to be a relay race. They changed the rules halfway through, but never mind that now. And through that lacquered black door, a new Prime Minister will shortly go to meet a fantastic group of public servants. The people who got Brexit done, the people who delivered the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, and never forget, 70% of the entire population got a dose within 6 months, faster than any comparable country. That is government for you. That's this Conservative government. People who organised those prompt early supplies of weapons to the heroic Ukrainian armed forces, an action that may very well have helped change the course of the biggest European war for 80 years. And because of the speed and urgency of what you did, everybody involved in this government, to get this economy moving again from July last year, in spite of all the opposition, all the naysayers, we have and will continue to have that economic strength to give people the cash they need to get through this energy crisis that has been caused by Putin's vicious war. And I know that Liz Truss and this compassionate Conservative government will do everything we can to get people through this crisis, and this country will endure it, and we will win. And if Putin thinks that he can succeed by blackmailing or bullying the British people, then he is utterly deluded. And the reason we will have those funds now and in the future is because we Conservatives understand the vital symmetry between government action and free market, capitalist, private sector enterprise. We're delivering on those huge manifesto commitments, making streets safer, neighbourhood crime down 38% in the last 3 years, 13,790 more police on the streets, building more hospitals, and yes, we will have 50,000 more nurses by the end of the decade, and 40 more hospitals by the end of 50,000 nurses by the end of this Parliament, I should say. 40 new hospitals by the end of the decade. Putting record funding into our schools and into teachers' pay, giving everybody over 18 a lifetime skills guarantee so they can keep upskilling throughout their lives. 3 new high-speed rail lines, 3, including Northern Powerhouse Rail, colossal road programmes from the Pennines to Cornwall, the rollout of gigabit broadband up over the last 3 years, I am proud to say, since you were kind enough to elect me, from 7% of our country's premises having gigabit broadband to 70% today. And we are, of course, providing the short and the long-term solutions for our energy needs, and not just using more of our own domestic hydrocarbons, but going up by 2030 to 50 gigawatts of wind power. That is half this country's electricity needs from offshore wind alone. A new nuclear reactor every year. And looking at what is happening in this country, the changes that are taking place, that is why private sector investment is flooding in. More private sector, more venture capital investment than China itself. More billion-pound tech companies sprouting here in the UK than in France, Germany and Israel combined. And as a result, unemployment, as I leave office, unemployment down to lows not seen since I was about 10 years old and bouncing around on a space hopper, my friends. And on the subject of bouncing around in future careers, let me say that I am now like one of those booster rockets that has fulfilled its function, and I will now be gently re-entering the atmosphere and splashing down invisibly in some remote and obscure corner of the Pacific. And like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plough, and I will be offering this government nothing but the most fervent support. This is, I'll tell you why, this is a tough time for the economy. This is a tough time for families up and down the country. We can and we will get through it, and we will come out stronger the other side. But I say to my fellow Conservatives, it's time for politics to be over, folks. It's time for us all to get behind Liz Truss and her team and her programme and deliver for the people of this country. Because that is what the people of this country want, that's what they need, and that's what they deserve. I'm proud to have discharged the promises I made to my party when you were kind enough to choose me. Winning the biggest majority since 1987, the biggest share of the vote since 1979. Delivering Brexit, delivering our manifesto commitments, including, by the way, including social care, reforming social care, helping people up and down the country, ensuring that Britain is once again standing tall in the world. Speaking with clarity and authority from Ukraine to the AUKUS pact with America and Australia. Because we are one whole and entire united kingdom whose diplomats, security services and armed forces are so globally admired. And by the way, as I leave, I believe our union is so strong that those who want to break it up, they'll keep trying, but they will never, ever succeed. Thank you to everybody behind me in this building. Thank you to all of you in government. Thank you to everybody who's helped look after me and my family over the last 3 years, including Dylan, the dog. And I just say to my party, if Dylan and Larry can put behind them their occasional difficulties, then so can the Conservative Party. Above all, thanks to you, the British people, to the voters for giving me the chance to serve. All of you who worked so tirelessly together to beat COVID, to put us where we are today. Together, we have laid foundations that will stand the test of time, whether by taking back control of our laws or putting in vital new infrastructure. Great, solid masonry on which we will continue to build together, paving the path of prosperity now and for future generations. And I will be supporting Liz Truss and the new government every step of the way. Thank you all very much. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you.
So Boris Johnson takes his wife Carrie's hand, says goodbye to friends, Conservative colleagues and family. One last handshake for Jacob Rees-Mogg and his son before Prime Minister Boris Johnson leaves Downing Street for the last time. And it did sound, from what he said, that he does see this as the last time. He was pledging loyalty to the Liz Truss government. He was talking about the Conservative Party putting differences behind it, moving on, sticking together. There was no hint or suggestion about trying to interject from the back benches. He said he would back her fully. One last round of applause from the crowd here as he disappears from Downing Street into the autumn sun on Whitehall. And it was interesting for someone who's talked throughout his premiership, throughout his political career about positivity and boosterism and sunshine, just at the moment as he came out and stood at that podium, the sun filled Downing Street. It's almost like he knew what time that was going to happen. So the cavalcade leaves here. Prime Minister Boris Johnson will no longer be Prime Minister in a few hours' time. And Nick Eardley is with us to reflect on that. Nick, I mean, it was classic Boris Johnson, wasn't it?
Yeah, look, I mean, he clearly wanted to try and defend his record and say, maybe not had as long as I wanted in power, but here's the things that I've done that I'm proud of. You know, all that mention of Brexit, of the COVID vaccine, of Ukraine. Gigabit broadband was something he wanted to talk a lot about. But look, I think there are three really important things to take away from that speech. Firstly, Boris Johnson made it pretty clear that he's still a bit bitter about the way that he was disposed, talking about his party changing the rules halfway through. It was only
turned out to be a relay race.
Exactly,
yeah.
Passing the baton on. You know, it was only the briefest of mentions, but clearly not totally happy still about what happened. He gave a pretty clear indication that, for now anyway, he's got no intention of a political comeback in this place. He talked about being the booster rocket that had fulfilled its function, now returning to his plough. I mean, look, John, let's be political realists here. Do we really think we've seen the last of Boris Johnson? I'm going to say maybe not, but he's trying to play down the idea that he's got unfinished business here. And then finally and thirdly, that idea that his party now needs to reunite. You know, we know that the Conservative Party's been fractured for some time. I suspect the idea of it reuniting is probably going to be a pretty tough task over the next few months. But there was that comparison between two of those animals that we love to see pictures of, Dylan, his dog, and Larry, the Downing Street cat, who is staying. Dylan goes, Larry stays, but he said if they get on, the Conservative Party can. The hope, I think, will be that he's left on a high where he's saying to his party, let's move on from this, let's get behind the Prime Minister and let her deal with the cost of living crisis.
And that memorable quote from him, I'm like one of those booster rockets that has now fulfilled its purpose. I'm going to splash down in an obscure remote part of the Pacific, almost like he's just going to disappear from view now. You're sceptical. Everyone's sceptical.
Look, I mean, if there's anything you can say about Boris Johnson, he often has something to say. He enjoys the limelight. You know, he's clearly still got a bit of bounce about him politically. I don't think we're going to see anything of him imminently. He's trying to tell us all that he's not wanting us all to continually talk about a political comeback from him. But look, would you bet your mortgage on never hearing from Boris Johnson in a prominent role again? I wouldn't.
And rumour has it that he's looking for a column in a newspaper again, and that would be a way of him communicating what he thought. Even if he's not doing television interviews and sit-down chats every 5 minutes on air, he could still have an awful lot of influence within the Conservative Party.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's still a big part of the Conservative Party which likes Boris Johnson. There's still a lot of ministers who are really sad at the way that things have panned out and the fact that he's now left Downing Street probably for good. I mean, look, I do think the Conservative Party does want to move on now. It does want to see what Liz Truss has when she comes here this afternoon, look at her vision, give her the benefit of the doubt. Boris Johnson has clearly been damaged considerably by what happened over the last few months. There's a reason he's leaving Downing Street, and that's that incredible day or two when we stood here and there was just a raft of resignations from government which made it impossible for him to govern. We've seen him say, here's the things I'm proud of. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes quiet for a few weeks, perhaps.
I think say a few hours.
A few weeks, perhaps a few months. But look, have we seen the last of Boris Johnson giving his views on different issues of state? Don't think so.
Nick, we'll talk again very soon. It's interesting to say the Conservative Party wanting to move on. They have literally moved on. Everybody's left within a couple of minutes. Boris Johnson and Carrie were whisked off into Whitehall. They're now flying up to Balmoral where they will say goodbye to the Queen. That is where Liz Truss will be formally asked by the Queen to form a government before she flies back here later this afternoon. But let's get some more political reaction, shall we? Our correspondent and friend John Maguire is on College Green, right outside the Houses of Parliament, seeing who he can find to talk to. Morning, John. Who have you got?
Yeah, morning, John. Just thinking there about Boris Johnson saying this is a relay race, and usually think that baton has to go all the way up to Balmoral and come back again before we get a new Prime Minister. Justine Greening is with me, former Cabinet Minister, Education Secretary for 2 years. A few years ago now, we've all just watched Boris Johnson's departure speech. What stood out? What did you make of it? What will we remember from it?
Well, I think
when we look back on Boris's time in Downing Street, I think people will have very different views. There will be some people that remember him as this Conservative Prime Minister that got a landslide, got Brexit done, all the things he was talking about. There'll be others who remember him for very, very different reasons, how divisive often his premiership has been, the lies and all of that activity that really was ultimately to bring him down. From my perspective, I think perhaps the most important thing was the way he was able to put this issue of levelling up and equality of opportunity right at the top of the political agenda. And having been in Parliament many years and being someone who has tried to really put social mobility at the top of the political agenda, I think he has enabled us as a country to move from whether we should be driving social mobility and equality of opportunity to a debate on how we do it. And I think that now is really the task for Liz Truss. Levelling up is work in progress. Liz Truss now needs to, as you say, take over that baton, but really start delivering on it.
But did all of the policy aspect, with all the best will in the world, get sidelined and sidetracked by all of the rows over Partygate?
I actually think COVID was probably the most important thing that got in the way of any government being able to get on with a normal domestic policy. But I thought it also underlined why having levelling up at the top of the agenda mattered, because it was about the fact that gaps open up in education that then cascade right the way through in people's lives and have huge impacts, not just on them, but our wider economy. So I think, yes, it's work in progress, and actually, as Boris set out, many areas that he had put in place policies around, but I think people will feel he was a Prime Minister that had everything going for him in terms of a massive majority and a lot of goodwill, but ultimately was undone by, ironically, his own behaviour and this inability of the parliamentary party to just ignore it.
And is it now a party that's even further divided? He hinted at that, didn't he? Talking about dogs and cats, Larry and Dylan, if they can get along, and he looked around and called for support. He said he'd be behind Liz Truss. He won't be sniping from the back benches. So is it a weakened party? Because as we all know, the electorate don't like divided parties when we're thinking about 2 years' time.
That's right. And I think the leadership contest has felt like you've seen a party debating with itself. And that choice about uniting the party, many will say Liz Truss now needs to unite the party. Of course she does. But I think there's also a decision for everyone who's in the Conservative Parliamentary Party to take themselves today. Are they going to get behind this new Conservative Prime Minister or not? There has been a process to select that next person. That process is now finished. And I think that decision on unity is a much broader one for the party. Is it serious about actually delivering on these big ticket challenges facing Britain, whether it's the cost of living crisis and levelling up or not? And on that question and how people respond to it in the Conservative Parliamentary Party will lie not just the fortunes of a wider country and people watching today who are seeing another Prime Minister come into Downing Street. Has been a hugely turbulent time for Britain at a time when there have been lots of challenges facing the country. Actually, the Conservative Party's political fortunes as the party in government also depend on delivering. It's got to be a party that takes people's priorities and makes them its priorities as the party in government. It's as simple as that. And that is a decision not just for Liz Truss and her government as an incoming administration, it's a decision for the whole parliamentary party now.
All right, Justine Greening, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Fascinating to hear that analysis, that reaction, not only to Boris Johnson's speech, but perhaps on the record of a government that, of course, has been in place now for some 12 years. It's the next 2 years, of course, that we will focus on over the next couple of days and weeks, and maybe even the immediate issues and priorities, policies for the new Truss government. As we say, dry here on College Green, dry up at Downing Street. That's sun rising with Boris Johnson heading off, not into the sunset, but into the sunrise. What's the weather going to be like in the future, the next couple of hours? Matt, tell us more.
Thank you very much, John. Well, showers will be on the way there and to Balmoral over the next few hours. It's going to be the same story really for many of us. It is a dry start at the moment for many, some mist and fog around, and while some sunshine will develop, those showers really will start to get going. Quite a turbulent night, in fact, lots of storms across the south of the UK which have since eased, but you notice this band of rain. It's fragmented a little bit, it's edging its way northwards, and it's this area here towards the southeast of Scotland which will be heading its way towards Balmoral for mid-morning. Again, there could be some rumbles of thunder redeveloping on that. Away from it, though, I said many dry at the moment, but there's some showers already to the south and west of England and Wales. They will develop more widely. Heaviest tended to be the further south you are. I think parts of Northern England, Northern Ireland will stay largely dry. Showers few and far between here, but compared with yesterday, a lot more showers around during the afternoon. Quite blustery to the northeast of Scotland and definitely towards the southwest of England and western parts of Wales. And with that wind, it's going to be a little bit cooler than it was yesterday. Temperatures down a few degrees, but still warm enough when the sun comes out. Temperatures in the high teens, low to mid-20s. Some stormy conditions potentially. East Anglia, southeast this evening. That will clear through. Wettest weather tonight, more likely across parts of Scotland later on, where again we could see some flashes of lightning, rumbles of thunder. The odd shower further south, and another pretty warm night. Temperatures around 13 to 15 as we start tomorrow morning. Low pressure, though, still in charge for Wednesday. It's getting closer in, and that means showers just become more and more abundant. More persistent rain in northern Scotland tomorrow to begin with, slowly starting to ease its way northwards, pushing towards Shetland later in the day. Sunny spells developing across the rest of the country, and then those showers get going. Some of them heavy, thundery, windiest conditions, again towards the southwest, and temperatures dropping just a little bit more. That's how it's looking. Back to Sally.
Thank you very much indeed, Matt. I suspect Liz Truss is watching right now to find out what the weather's going to be like in Downing Street when she gives her speech here, having been appointed by the Queen later this afternoon. Downing Street has kind of emptied out of all the politicians and all the members of Boris Johnson's friendship circle and family. They've all gone away to have breakfast, probably reflect on his years after his farewell. I have to say, after he gave that speech, everybody hit the phones. I certainly did, because I didn't know when he was talking about being like Cincinnatus. I had to look up who was Cincinnatus. I'm not sure what your ancient history, your classical history is like. Should have known that Boris Johnson would throw in a reference like that. Anyway, apparently Cincinnatus, famously in ancient times, left politics and returned to his plough. And that's what Boris Johnson was referring to. The very clever people around here, including Professor Jon Tong, who we sometimes have as a guest on Breakfast, a politics professor, says that 19 years after he returned to his plough, Cincinnatus then went back into politics. So whether that was Boris Johnson making some kind of veiled reference to his long-term plans and maybe not going quietly and maybe coming back at some point, who knows? But there we are, we're seeing the pictures there. This was just a few minutes ago, live on BBC Breakfast, of Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and he does remain Prime Minister until he formally has that title taken away from him by the Queen in a couple of hours' time at Balmoral, getting into his Range Rover there with his wife Carrie and heading off into sunny Whitehall. They're flying up to Scotland. Liz Truss will then follow him into Balmoral to meet the Queen, and then she flies back as Prime Minister. And we will hear not just her cabinet, but we'll also, we think, in the next couple of days, hear his plans. This was the end of his speech. A few minutes ago, he went straight from the podium to take his wife's hand and then to say goodbye and thank you to Nadine Dorries there, his very loyal Culture Secretary. His sister Rachel Johnson is there. We saw Grant Shapps in the background. You'll see Jacob Rees-Mogg in a moment on the right-hand side. It's Grant Shapps. Quite a full house. Not all of them here, but as you'd expect, Boris Johnson has been a very divisive member of the Conservative Party. There's some people in the cabinet, of course, walked out of his cabinet only a couple of months ago and didn't want him to stay in the job. Would have been a bit awkward, I guess, for them to turn up and say goodbye this morning, so they weren't here. But throughout this morning, we're getting lots of guests from all the political sides to reflect. We can go back now to John Maguire, who's on College Green, to find out who else he's grabbed. Hi, John. Who have you found?
John, morning. I think everybody here thought he said he was going to be moving to Cincinnati. Lots of confusion, as you say, about that reference to ancient history. Dr. Hannah White is with me from the Institute for Government, very experienced former civil servant. So you'll be fascinated, as we all are, by what's happening, what's been happening. Normally, of course, a transition at Downing Street goes after a general election from one party to the other, but we've become used to this, haven't we, over the last few years, of the same party getting rid of their leader, electing a new one, and then becoming Prime Minister. What's happening behind the scenes?
Well, as you say, the Conservative Party seems to have got rather used to changing Prime Minister mid-term. We've had now 4 Prime Ministers in the last 6 years. And behind the scenes, the civil servants will be preparing for the new incoming government. They will be, over the summer, have been preparing, talking to the 2 different camps, the Sunak camp and the Truss camp, in anticipation of each of their possible policy platforms, trying to provide them with the information they need. But it's not really until you actually step through that door into Downing Street and become Prime Minister that you're really equipped with the full power of the government machine, which enables you to step up and become Prime Minister.
A couple of phrases that we've heard a lot over the last couple of weeks: hitting the ground running, and a very, very, perhaps historically full in-tray. They're huge challenges. Are they unachievable challenges?
Well, you know, no Prime Minister necessarily has it easy. Yes, there do seem to be a considerable number of challenges, and very immediate challenges, and those have been exacerbated by the fact that we've had this long leadership campaign which has been over the summer recess. There's been a sense, I think, in the country that there hasn't been government. Now, that's obviously not true. Boris Johnson has been our Prime Minister, the civil service has been working away, but that decision-making power, which seems so crucial at this time with the rising cost of living, hasn't been there, and everything's been waiting for this day when Liz Truss steps into number 10.
Is that what really happens? You know, as you say, there has been work going on, and you can't certainly say crisis what crisis. We know there is a crisis. Talking to people around the country, a very, very real one that affects real lives. But the work's been taking place, but there's been that sense, hasn't there, that nothing has been happening. How should we look at that?
No, I mean, the work will have been going
Yes.
on with the civil service. They will have been primarily, I think, planning for 2 different possible futures, but preparing options, trying to get all the material in place so that when Liz Truss, her new Chancellor, and her cabinet that she sets up are in place, they have all the information that she may need. And they will have been talking to her. They will have been talking behind the scenes. We've heard that the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, has been down at Chevening for a long, for the last couple of weeks, talking to her, as well as also talking to the Sunak campaign, but a clear indication that they've been trying to prepare to see what she wants to do and trying to help her think through how she's going to do it.
And do you expect the new government to be very different, to have, obviously the policies are broadly the same? She's already said she'll govern as a Conservative, sticking to a lot of the manifesto pledges that were made in 2019, but will it be any different?
Well, we're waiting to see what the style of government is. As you say, she's still governing to the same manifesto, the manifesto that the Conservatives were elected on. She'll want to put her own priorities on that, and she'll need to do that quickly because she's got to deliver. She made it very clear yesterday that she intends to have the next election in 2024. I think she was trying to put to bed rumours that she might go for an early election. Of course, she still might, but she's got to prioritise. But what we're waiting to see is the tone of her government. She was very clear yesterday. She talked about her friend Boris Johnson. She wants in some ways to provide a sense of continuity to the party, that she's not going to just ditch everything they liked about Boris Johnson. But I think she'd be well advised to make sure that she really sets up number 10 to help her deliver. And we've had some reporting in the press that she's planning to really strip back the operations in number 10. She needs to be careful doing that. Yes, potentially it can get smaller, but there are key functions that you need around you as Prime Minister in number 10 if you're going to deliver. And she's made a big play about how she is a person who delivers. She needs the tools in government to enable her to do that.
Dr. Hannah White, thank you very much indeed for your expertise this morning. That word deliver, we heard that a lot of times yesterday. I didn't count how many in Liz Truss's victory speech, her valedictory speech yesterday after being made leader of the Conservative Party. We're just hours away from her, of course, being made Prime Minister, and huge challenges ahead. That in-tray, as we say, historically full. You get an idea really of how many people work just at number 10, don't you, with the amount of people that were in Downing Street when Boris Johnson left earlier this morning. So for now, Sally, back to you in the studio.
Jon, thank you very much indeed. So as Jon was saying, an incredible number of people in Downing Street this morning to witness the departure of Boris Johnson that we brought you live here on the programme. This is the moment he finished his speech, walked over to his staff, and as you will see, many hugs, congratulations, thanks. Some of the staff clearly quite emotional at times. This is him saying goodbye to the people he has been working with. In his speech, when he addressed the nation at 7:30, bang on 7:30, right on time, he pledged his support for Liz Truss And he described himself as like a booster rocket that has now fulfilled its function and promised to splash down somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. Hints of what might come next, but no clear, definitive suggestion of what he's definitely going to do next. But he did pledge his support to the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss. This is him getting in the car, driving off to be taken to Balmoral this morning to speak to the Queen, where he will formally resign. So those are the images we brought you just a short time ago. Boris Johnson leaving Downing Street as Prime Minister for the very last time. Do stay with us, the headlines are coming right up.
I'm travelling the length of the Americas, through some of the world's greatest landscapes. Along the way, I encounter inspiring people in the continent of dramatic extremes.
Simon Reeve's South America starts Sunday at 9 on BBC Two and iPlayer.
Hello there, good morning, welcome to breakfast. It's 8 o'clock, I'm Jon Kay, live in Downing Street this morning on the day that a new Prime Minister is appointed. Sally is in the studio in Salford. Here are our headlines today. Liz Truss will be handed the keys to number 10 this afternoon after beating her Conservative leadership rival Rishi Sunak to the top job. In the last half hour, Boris Johnson said farewell in Downing Street before heading to Balmoral to see the Queen. That's where he will formally resign.
Above all, thanks to you, the British people, to the voters for giving me the chance to serve, all of you who worked so tirelessly together to beat COVID, to put us where we are today.
Here at Balmoral, in 4 hours' time, the Queen will receive Liz Truss and ask her to form a government and take office as Prime Minister.
We're going to look at what's in Liz Truss's very full in tray when she walks through that famous black door to start her new job. Number one priority, tackling those soaring energy bills.
And I'm in the constituency of Lieu in Greater Manchester. This is one of the former mining communities that turned Tory in the last election. What do people here want from the new Prime Minister?
Also this morning, one of two suspects in Sunday's mass stabbings in Western Canada has been found dead, but the other remains at large.
In sport, as Rafa Nadal falls at Flushing.
Plus, the weather remains fairly turbulent at the moment after a night of severe storms. Today, a day of sunshine and thundery showers. I'll have your full forecast here on Breakfast.
Hello there, good morning. It's Tuesday the 6th of September and our main story is that in the last half hour, Boris Johnson has delivered his final speech as Prime Minister. He left Downing Street about 7:30 with his wife. He's now on his way to Scotland, to Balmoral, to see the Queen. That's where he will formally resign. That's where his 3-year premiership officially comes to an end. We're going to reflect on that and we're also going to look at what Liz Truss has ahead of her as Prime Minister when she gets here this afternoon. But first, let's have a quick listen to what Boris Johnson had to say.
The people who got Brexit done, the people who delivered the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, and never forget, 70% of the entire population got a dose within 6 months, faster than any comparable country. That is government for you. That's this Conservative government. People who organised those prompt early supplies of weapons to the heroic Ukrainian armed forces, an action that may very well have helped change the course of the biggest European war for 80 years. And because of the speed and urgency of what you did, everybody involved in this government, to get this economy moving again from July last year, in spite of all the opposition, all the naysayers, we have and will continue to have that economic strength to give people the cash they need to get through this energy crisis that has been caused by Putin's vicious war. And I know that Liz Truss and this compassionate Conservative government will do everything we can to get people through this crisis, and this country will endure it, and we will win. And if Putin thinks that he can succeed by blackmailing or bullying the British people, then he is utterly deluded. Above all, thanks to you, the British people, to the voters for giving me the chance to serve, all of you who worked so tirelessly together to beat COVID, to put us where we are today. Together, we have laid foundations that will stand the test of time, whether by taking back control of our laws or putting in vital new infrastructure. Great, solid masonry on which we will continue to build together, paving the path of prosperity now and for future generations. And I will be supporting Liz Truss and the new government every step of the way. Thank you all very much. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you.
And with that, the Boris Johnson era in Downing Street, at least, was over. He hits the road, heads to Scotland to meet the Queen, and come lunchtime, he'll have formally resigned. That'll be it for him, we assume. Although there are some questions about whether he might try and make a comeback or interject in some way in the future. Let's talk to Nick Eardley, our chief political correspondent, who's here with us in Downing Street this morning in the blazing sunshine. I'm sorry, struggling a bit with the bright lights there. What do you make of that performance? Because it was very much a performance by Boris Johnson, classic Boris Johnson.
Yeah, look, he was energetic, he was boosterish, that phrase that's become synonymous with Boris Johnson, where he likes to talk about the positives. I've watched a few of these speeches over the last few years, and there's always a bit of a valedictory sense of, here's what I'm proud of in office. Of course we got that. But look, there were some things that stood out for me. Firstly, Boris Johnson saying his party has to unite now. We've covered Tory civil wars for the last 6-7 years now. And he's trying to say to his party, look, however annoyed some of you might be about me or the way I was brought down, you need to get behind Liz Truss now. And he linked that to the cost of living crisis, saying she needs to be given a chance to get on with trying to deliver on that. And linked to that, he's played down the idea that he could make a political comeback. I don't think speculation about Boris Johnson is going to go away. I don't think we've heard the last of him, but he was pretty clear that in the immediate future he sees his role as supportive of the new Prime Minister. What was that phrase he used? A booster rocket that has fulfilled his function. I think he's trying and persuade us all that Boris Johnson Mark II is probably not going to happen, but probably is still a word I'd use, because with Boris Johnson, I suspect he might be tempted to make his views known a bit in the future.
You wonder what conversation he's having with his wife in the car as they head to the airport to fly to Balmoral right now. How he genuinely internally is looking back, because there was no emotion. There were no tears, no crack of the voice, nothing visible. It was full-on Boris Johnson energy. I thought that was interesting, comparing that with Theresa May or even David Cameron, Gordon Brown.
Yeah, look, I think that's what Boris Johnson's like. If you speak to him privately or you see him in public, he is quite an energetic figure. He's a showman. That's why we all got to know who he was before he was Prime Minister, because he's full of energy, he's full of beans. He comes out at 7:30 in the morning and is full of energy and saying what he thinks he's achieved in power. But in some ways, that was also his downfall. His ability to say what was popular, sometimes to not give the full account of what had gone on when it came to Downing Street parties or to other things that happened, like the Chris Pincher scandal. Those were the things that ultimately brought Boris Johnson down. But his character hasn't changed at all. And you did get that sense, didn't you, John, in that speech, just at the start, where he talked about his party changing the rules halfway through. He's not totally got over how he was brought down.
And let's think about this afternoon, because the weather's going to be very different this afternoon. We're expecting thunderstorm and lightning, and the tone will be very different as well, no doubt, when Liz Truss comes and does the same thing at a podium and starts, gives the beginning of her premiership. What do you expect?
Normally on these days, there's an incredibly quick changeover, and the staff members that you saw standing on Downing Street a few minutes ago, they basically go in and then they're ushered out the back, and the other ones come in straight away. Today is a bit less brutal. You've got a few hours because Boris Johnson and Liz Truss both have to go and see the Queen up in Aberdeenshire at Balmoral. But yes, I mean, over the next few hours, we'll be watching whether any other cabinet ministers say they're going. We have 2 prominent people leaving already. Nadine Dorries, who we saw walking into number 10 earlier, she's out as Culture Secretary. She's decided she doesn't want to stay on in government, despite, we think, being offered a job. Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, has said she's going back to the back benches as well. And over the next few hours, we are going to talk a lot about who might be in power with Liz Truss over the next few months. Kwasi Kwarteng, I'm certain, is going to be Chancellor. I expect to see James Cleverly at the Foreign Office, Suella Braverman at the Home Office, as well as some of Boris Johnson's staff members get their final photos before
Make the most of this opportunity.
Well.
Yes.
Not? Yeah.
There we go. That's one for the family album,
Everyone
isn't it?
takes a photo in Downing Street when they leave.
We've been taking photos in Downing Street, yeah.
You're giving the secrets away, John. But look, this afternoon, you're going to see, yes, a very different tone, because about 4 o'clock, Liz Truss, weather permitting, will be standing there. As I said, weather permitting, the sun went away there, but weather permitting, Liz Truss will be standing there about 4 o'clock this afternoon, and she will be setting out a vision for the country that I think will still be optimistic, but with the backdrop of one of the most daunting entries for any Prime Minister in the last 30, 40, 50 years. She has a lot to face up to. The potential of recession being confirmed pretty soon, inflation, the economy in a challenging place, the cost of living crisis, the NHS in a really challenging place as well. It's not going to be an easy ride for Liz Truss. I was speaking to some people, some aides around her over the past 24 hours, and they get that. They get that this is going to be a really turbulent period. She has a chance at 4 o'clock or thereabouts to set out to the country what she thinks she can deliver to try and help everybody with the crises.
OK, Nick, for now, thank you very much indeed. Nick was talking then about Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, the handover, what happens. So this is what you need to know about the hours ahead. Basically, Boris Johnson is right now on his way to Balmoral. That's where he formally hands in his resignation to the Queen. One last private meeting with her. And then later on, Liz Truss turns up at Balmoral separately, and that's where the Queen then asks her to form a government, and that's when she officially becomes Prime Minister. Not yesterday when she was selected by her party, only when the Queen asks her. Ms Truss then comes down to Downing Street. She flies back down to London. On the way, we're expecting that she'll get security briefings and be given state secrets, that kind of thing. And then she turns up here in front of number 10, the door, and gives her hello address, her introductory speech this afternoon, followed, of course, by the hard work beginning. She goes inside, she confirms the final cabinet positions and prepares for Prime Minister's questions, because she faces Keir Starmer in the House of Commons tomorrow lunchtime. It's booster rockers on her day now, to use Boris Johnson's phrase. Should we go to Balmoral? Because our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell is there outside. A different kind of day for you. You've done these handovers before, Nick, but never at Balmoral before. Good morning.
That's absolutely right. John, good morning from Balmoral here in the Scottish Highlands. There are the gates to Balmoral Castle just behind me, where the Prime Ministers, outgoing and incoming, will be arriving in a matter of hours. And as you were saying, normally, of course, this whole procedure takes place at Buckingham Palace. That's where the Queen has appointed all the previous Prime Ministers of her long reign. Today, though, it is different. It is different, of course, because of the mobility issues that the Queen is experiencing at the moment. A decision was taken that she would remain here at Balmoral and the Prime Ministers would come to her. We expect to see Boris Johnson arriving here shortly before 11:30. That's the timetable. He will be flying up to Aberdeen and then coming by road the 45 miles from Aberdeen to Balmoral here. And he will see the Queen in the drawing room at Balmoral Castle, and he will tender his resignation. Then a few minutes later, shortly after midday, we expect Liz Truss will arrive. She will have an audience with the Queen, and the Queen will invite her to form a government. And this really is an expression of our constitutional settlement, whereby the monarch, exercising what's known as the royal prerogative, invites the leader of the largest party in the House of Commons to form a government and to become Prime Minister. It's all known as the kissing of hands, but there is no kissing, just a handshake.
No kissing, Nick. Thank you very much indeed. What the pictures you're looking at now is the plane that will take Boris Johnson from London, from RAF Northolt in West London. That will fly him up to Aberdeenshire, to Balmoral for that kissing of hands, brackets no kissing, with the Queen. And then I imagine it is the same plane that will then bring Liz Truss alone back to London to start. I'm not sure how Boris Johnson gets back to London or what his plans are. He was talking about splashing down in the Pacific like a booster rocket that's been used. And maybe that's where he's going on his holiday after this lunchtime. Who knows? But that's the plane waiting at Northolt to take Boris Johnson up to Scotland to meet the Queen. You know, the weather is crucial in this. It's of course crucial in terms of what the planes can do, but it's also crucial in terms of whether Liz Truss gets to stand outside Downing Street and give her speech, as traditionally happens, or whether she might have to move inside because there are heavy, thundery downpours planned for central London, forecast for central London later this afternoon. And we can hear from Matt now, who's been looking at the weather for us across the UK, but also for Downing Street. Matt, morning.
Indeed, John. Very good morning to you. We have got the rain actually heading towards Balmoral as well, but some thunderstorms are possible in the London area later this afternoon and into the evening. Maybe not quite as spectacular as the ones we saw last night, once again across parts of England, Wales and northern France, around 30,000 lightning flashes. Those have since eased. The rain, though, is what's going to be pushing towards Balmoral. It's this area here, which is working its way northwards over the next few hours. That will become heavy and persistent, and there could be some rumbles of thunder here as we go through the morning, early afternoon. Away from that, 1 or 2 showers dotted around the south and the west at the moment, but notice how they'll blossom more widely as we go through the rest of the afternoon. A bit of sunshine in between will lift temperatures into the low 20s, maybe mid-20s for some. So still another warm day out here, but you can see through the afternoon, and as we head towards the evening, those showers around. This batch here will be another batch heading towards London later on, so there could be some showers on and off here through the afternoon, some of those heavy and thundery, and whilst there'll be some sunshine between the showers, a bit more of which across parts of southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England this afternoon. Further north, the rain should clear Balmoral for the end of the day, but there'll be more wet weather tonight. In fact, this curl of rain will start to set in across Scotland through tonight. Again, we could see some flashes of lightning. Not as turbulent tonight across the rest of the country compared with recent nights. 1 or 2 showers dotted around. Mild enough start to tomorrow. But over the next few days, we'll see temperatures drop a little bit, and there will be continuing story of sunshine and showers. But certainly, John, through this afternoon, the potential is there for some thundery downpours not too far away from Downing Street.
They're making contingencies here at number 10, Matt. That might move inside for Liz Truss later. It might move outside. Some people making the most of the dry weather at this morning and having those last pictures taken. We've seen members of Boris Johnson's staff coming out and getting those snaps to remember their careers and lives here. Some of them, that's it. He's gone. Some of them will go too. And a new era begins in British politics. As we were just saying, Boris Johnson currently heading to Northolt, RAF Northolt in West London. That's where there is a plane on the tarmac waiting to take him to Scotland. Is that some activity? Oh, there we go. Perfect timing. There's the Prime Minister. There's his wife Carrie in the pink dress as well, about to board the plane that will take them up to Aberdeenshire for that formal handing over of power. Of course, it's very different this time. Normally a Prime Minister would just have to head up the Mall to see the Queen in the drawing room at Buckingham Palace. But this time, after some health worries about Her Majesty over the last few weeks, it's been decided that she will stay at Balmoral, where she goes for the summer, and the outgoing Prime Minister and the incoming Prime Minister will both go to her. Now, Liz Truss is not on the same plane as Boris Johnson. We understand she will make her way up to Scotland separately. That would be quite a journey, wouldn't it, if they were together? I guess for security reasons, you can't have effectively 2 Prime Ministers travelling together. They'd have to do it safely and apart. But Boris Johnson, we know, is now on that plane with his wife, and they are heading up to Scotland. No sign of the 2 children this morning, Wilfred and Romy, of course, who've both been born during Boris Johnson's premiership. A lot's happened in his life personally and politically in the last 3 years. They came out to hear his speech when he actually announced that he was standing down, but they didn't emerge this morning. It is early morning, isn't it? Who wants to be out in Downing Street with their mum and dad at this time in the morning? Probably stay inside and have breakfast instead. Right, lots more guests still to come. John's at College Green, grabbing politicians from all sides, and I think he's got another one. Morning, John.
John, you're absolutely right. We're joined by Ian Blackford, the leader of the Scottish National Party here at Westminster. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on breakfast this morning. You had a chance, I think, to listen to the Prime Minister's departure speech, a greatest hits list, if you like. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's everything that we've heard in Prime Minister's questions over the last couple of years. It was a reprise of all of that. Look, I wish him all the best for the future. I'm glad that he's gone, because I do think he has besmirched the office that he has held. Let's move on. And I think today it's really a question about how we deal with the cost of living crisis. How do we cap energy costs? And that's the challenge that the Prime Minister faces. And I want to make sure that we engage positively with her in order that we protect consumers, that we protect businesses. There's a big job to do this week.
Might that be a moment where parties come together and form some sort of agreement?
Well, this is the biggest economic crisis that we have faced since the 1970s, and I think as the opposition, as the government in Scotland, it's beholden on us that we act in a reasoned manner. And I'm saying to the Prime Minister today, let's cap the energy cost increases for consumers and for businesses, because we face a number of businesses going to the wall, quite frankly, if we don't do that. Where we're going to have the debate, and it's an important one, is how we pay for this. And what we've repeatedly said, that this should be done through a windfall tax on the oil and gas producers and those that have made high profits over the course of the COVID pandemic and the energy crisis. But secondly, we need to make sure that we fund that through debt. This can't be deferred costs for consumers. Consumers can't be left to pick up the bill for this, because fundamentally what's happening today in the gas markets is a consequence of the war in Ukraine. We stand with Ukraine. It's important that we do that. But bill payers in Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom can't pay the price for that. Government has to pick up the tab for this. And secondly, the idea that at a time like this, that you would be contemplating tax cuts is for the birds. Let's make sure that we act in a responsible manner to protect people. And in the middle of a cost of living crisis, when we have a balance of payments crisis, the idea that those that are wealthy get a tax cut, it's simply the wrong time to do it. Not even Margaret Thatcher would have done that in 1979.
Tax was the first thing that Liz Truss mentioned in her speech yesterday. Do you have more confidence in her that she can somehow get to grips with this cost of living crisis, with this energy crisis, than her predecessor?
Well, what we need to do is we need to actually reassure people that they're going to be able to turn the heating on this winter, that they're being able to put food on the table, and that means let's stop the energy price increase. And actually, if we do that, we'll cap the rise in inflation, which is going to be so important. Capping energy prices will mean that inflation will be 4% less than it would otherwise have been. And that's important because we've got a spiralling of costs at the moment. We have to intervene, we have to stop that, or quite frankly, we'll face bigger problems. So there has to be a harsh reality that comes out of this, and certainly tax cuts, not today, Prime Minister. Let's make sure that we protect bill payers. That's the priority.
Right. Ian Blackford, thank you very much indeed for your time on BBC Breakfast this morning. That sense of urgency then, I'm sure, won't be lost on the next Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, as Nick Witcher was saying, once the kissing of hands has taken place and Liz Truss takes up the baton, returns to Downing Street, where you are, John, takes over with, as we've been saying all morning and over the last couple of weeks and months, of course, a very, very full in train. Back to you, John.
Absolutely, and Boris Johnson has that flight ahead of him. Sorry, there's somebody, all the photographers are taking down their step ladders that they rely on and repositioning them for the Liz Truss moment later in the day. So there's a bit of clattering around, but on the tarmac at RF Northolt in West London is the plane taxiing there. I understand it is a Falcon plane. You know, Nick Eardley isn't just our chief political correspondent, he's a bit of a plane spotter as well. He tells me it's a Falcon, so if it's not, we'll blame Nick. But I'm sure he's right. He's right about everything. And Boris Johnson on board there with his wife Carrie, flying up to Aberdeenshire to meet the Queen at Balmoral as the choreography of this handover day continues. It's interesting, I was talking to a couple of people after yesterday's programme who were saying, well, I thought it was all over yesterday lunchtime once we knew that Liz Truss had won. No, she's not actually formally Prime Minister until Boris Johnson has tendered his resignation to Her Majesty, and the Queen then appoints his successor as Liz Truss. So all of this going on, the plane about to take off from London. I reckon it's, what, about an hour and a quarter or something like that up to Aberdeenshire. And then he has the journey to Balmoral itself to meet the Queen. And then he's a free man. What does he do then? There's a lot of speculation here that he won't be able to resist interjecting in some way, that he might even be planning a political future, and people looking through his speech that he gave here in the last hour and looking for hints and clues in classical literature that maybe he will think about coming back one day. But he says he's utterly loyal to Liz Truss and her new government. He says the Conservative Party as a whole has to stick together, come together and deal with these enormous challenges that the whole of the UK is facing, not least those soaring energy bills. And we're expecting Liz Truss to give urgent attention to that. Her team briefing that she will be announcing in the first few hours of her premiership, her plans, and on Thursday a big unveiling of more precise plans about how everybody watching this morning could be affected by a potential freeze in energy bills. But how will that be paid for? Will it be paid for by consumers? Will there be a windfall tax, as some of the opposition parties are calling for? There's also discussion about what might happen with inflation, how businesses, and then the knock-on for inflation as well. So some massive issues for Liz Truss, as well as the climate and education and housing and of course the National Health Service. But it all basically comes down to the state of the economy, the state of the government's books, and the state of domestic household account in the weeks and months ahead through this winter. So the plane taxiing on the runway at Northolt. We've heard the engines revving as Boris Johnson leaves London, having already left Downing Street. I wonder how he's really reflecting on his political career. We heard how he wants to be remembered. He gave us that long list about how he'd delivered Brexit. His critics will say, well, not necessarily, especially for people and businesses in Northern Ireland. That hasn't been sorted out yet, the Northern Ireland Protocol. He talked about the vaccine rollout and how he handled COVID, although some of his critics will ask for many years to come about whether those lockdowns were the right way to do it. Has the lockdown approach left the UK with a huge financial hangover, which is going to take decades potentially for governments and for the UK people to come to terms with? But our cameras for now focusing on Northolt and his departure. Carrie Johnson inside as well. I didn't see Stanley Johnson, the Prime Minister's father, here this morning. Of course, he was an MEP, a Conservative. He was very pro-Europe in his time. He's spoken, quite frankly, at times about his son. He was very critical only a week or two ago in the media about Boris Johnson's policy and the Brexit result as he saw it as sewage ending up in the sea and in rivers, and saying that that was something that his son should have dealt with differently. Didn't see Stanley Johnson here this morning, but certainly the Prime Minister's sister and some other relatives were here because, you know, who knows, it might be their last time visiting number 10 as well. So there we go, the plane Falcon, apparently, at the end of the runway, lights flashing, waiting for the off to head up to Balmoral. Nick Witchell, our royal correspondent, was reporting and explaining just how differently today is going to be, that the timings all have to take into account the fact that the Queen is currently resident in Scotland, and so that puts extra complications on things, but clearly nobody's arguing with that. The Queen's comfort is a priority to all involved. That's what everybody has said, and they will work around her, obviously. So rather than Buckingham Palace, they head up to Scotland. There's the runway. Well, what does the future hold? What's the political, personal runway for Boris Johnson? I wonder what he's imagining, what he's focusing on as he looks into the future. I was intrigued by that reference to splashing down in the Pacific. I'm wondering whether we'll expect some holiday pictures from Fiji or something in the weeks ahead. But first, he's got to go to Scotland, where the weather is rather different this morning. But we think he's going to escape the thunder and lightning on his way up, at least, that have been predicted by Matt this morning in the weather forecast. Is it my imagination, or is that plane moving? No, it's my imagination. Or wishful thinking, I think. Wishful thinking. The choreography of this really interesting. And Boris Johnson, his departure saw a lot of his most loyal political colleagues and friends here in Downing Street. How Liz Truss deals with her arrival is going to be interesting as well, isn't it? Who will she choose to invite to be seen in public here with her? And what about the personal side of things? How will she deal with this? We saw her husband yesterday sitting next to her when she was selected, as she found out that she'd been elected by the Conservative Party. But no sense about whether she's going to be open about the rest of her family life, her two daughters, whether they will play a public use, a public part in public life, whether they will appear here today. But there we go. Boris Johnson leaves London after saying farewell to Downing Street. His plane taking off from RAF Northolt as he heads to Balmoral in Scotland, where he officially hands in his resignation to the Queen and she appoints his successor. He left Downing Street in glorious autumn sunshine. He flies into the air there, rather cloudy air and a bit more miserable. Delighted to say that Chris Mason is going to be with us to talk through all of this. Let's talk to Chris now, shall we? Chris is here right now. Thank you for joining us.
Morning.
Quite a morning, isn't it?
Yeah.
What do you make of what we heard from Boris Johnson and what happens in the next few hours? Because the tone changes.
It does. Firstly, the big picture, the personal, the political, the constitutional, all meeting each other here in Downing Street in the last hour. The same will happen this afternoon when Liz Truss arrives. And then, inevitably, the focus on Boris Johnson's words. How often have we uttered sentences like that over the last 20 years? He is a man of words and had thought very, very carefully about the words that he chose. And in short, two things. Firstly, he didn't use this sentence, but he might as well have done. Why did you get rid of me?
Yeah.
That was the tone of the whole speech. And then secondly, those couple of references, one leaning heavily on his classical interests and the other a little more space-related, basically suggesting we've not heard the last from him, and who knows, maybe he'll come back. And so the Boris Johnson soap opera, which followed him to Downing Street, followed him during his time behind that black door, will continue following him afterwards. And you can be absolutely certain that even a syllable uttered out loud or committed to paper will lead every camera lens, every reporter in their notebook to tilt in his direction. Now, I suspect in the early weeks and months, maybe he'll say little, maybe he'll be pretty loyal to Liz Truss, but she'll be very nervous. All Prime Ministers are nervous about the prospect of a backseat driver. What a backseat driver Boris Johnson could prove to be were he to choose to.
Chris, we have to break there. Thank you very much indeed. Chris Mason, our political editor. We need to check in with our teams around the UK to get the news, the travel and weather where you are. More from Downing Street in the next few minutes. See you in a sec.
Hello, good morning. Breakfast is here on BBC One until 9:15 this morning. Then after us, it's time for Morning Live with Michelle and Gethin, and they can tell us what they've got in store for us. Morning, guys.
Good morning, Sally. So there you go. You've been watching John from Number 10 all morning. A huge day for British politics with Boris Johnson waving goodbye to Downing Street, to quote a former leader, like a rocket booster, which has fulfilled its function.
It's now all eyes on our new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, to see how she deals with everything from the cost of living crisis to NHS waiting times. We've been asking what you want her to prioritise. We'd love to hear from breakfast viewers on this, so send in your comments. Details of how to do that are on your screen.
Plus, it's a potentially deadly heart condition that doesn't always have symptoms, which means hundreds of thousands of people could be walking around without realising they have it. Dr. Zand is here to tell us about aortic stenosis.
That's right, I'll be explaining why simple things like feeling breathless or being more tired after walking or doing the shopping, they might not seem too serious, but they are the things that you should be talking to your GP about.
Also, England had its joint hottest summer on record, and combined with drought, low rainfall and a hosepipe ban in some places, your outdoor space might be a bit brown and withered. But never fear, our gardener Mark Lane is here and he'll tell us why watering a scorched lawn is actually the worst thing you can do.
And we're on a mission to save you cash. Money for Nothing. Sarah Moore is giving tired furniture a new lease of life. She tells us how to upcycle on a budget using old wallpaper scraps.
Plus, Katie McGlynn is taking us back to the first dances of winning couples in Strictly Fitness. And today, it's a cha-cha-cha from Bill and Oatie.
Some combing of the hair, there's a bit of flicking of the
love
hair.
that flick.
It's one of the two. We'll find out what it is.
See you at 9:15.
Looking forward to it. We will see you then. As we've been saying, John is in Downing Street this morning doing a sterling job. And John, I'm curious to know, can you tell me any more information about that plane we just watched? Is there anything left to say?
No.
You did so well.
There is nothing left to say. It's gone. It's gone. That's all we need to know. The plane has gone. Boris Johnson has gone. He has left London, Sal, and we now await the official handover of power, which takes place at Balmoral. That's where he will officially hand in his resignation to the Queen, and then Liz Truss will take over. But we're asking this morning, how will he be remembered? How will he want himself to be remembered? Well, we got a taste of that with a final flourish in his speech here in the last hour.
Let me say that I am now like one of those booster rockets that has fulfilled its function, and I will now be gently re-entering the atmosphere and splashing down invisibly in some remote and obscure corner of the Pacific. And like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plough, and I will be offering this government nothing but the most fervent support. This is, I'll tell you why, this is a tough time for the economy. This is a tough time for families up and down the country. We can and we will get through it, and we will come out stronger the other side. But I say to my fellow Conservatives, it's time for politics to be over, folks. It's time for us all to get behind Liz Truss and her team and her programme and deliver for the people of this country.
Some eyebrows raised here this morning by that. Is Boris Johnson really the splashing down quietly type? Is he really going to go that quietly? And that reference to Cincinnatus, we all looked up on our phones. Apparently he was an old Roman politician who did return to his plough, but then he did return to politics a few years later, and some questions about whether that might be a hidden message. But anyway, let's talk open messages. Political editor Chris Mason still with us. Morning.
Morning.
It was interesting, that, wasn't it, about his departure, but also really interesting what happens now, the change in tone, a new Prime Minister. Boris has gone.
He has. At least he's gone from here. And who knows what he'll do next. I thought the striking thing around that space exploration imagery is that these are very televisual events, aren't they, when rockets are launched towards the stars, and also nothing is left to chance. Boris Johnson had penned those words himself, hadn't involved advisors in their assembly. The classicist reference, someone who always has loved and revered that kind of period of history, as you say, with that reference to a former politician who did come back. And we know that Boris Johnson will continue to make a splash. It won't be invisible, and he will still be part of the political conversation. Of that we can be certain. But for now at least, he departs, soon to stand down to resign as Prime Minister. And then a day of choreography, garnished with geography because of that trip to Balmoral. The most important words politically we'll hear today are not the ones we've heard in the last hour, but the ones that we'll hear probably around about tea time, 4 o'clock, subject to air traffic control and the weather. Lovely blue sky here in central London now. I can tell you at 10:30 last night when I left here, there was an absolute deluge, and there may be one a little later today. Liz Truss will really hope she can give that opening speech of her premiership. At that white mark, you can see the mark of tape, I think, on the floor below us there on the tarmac, which is where the lectern will stand, because that will frame her premiership. When Theresa May was Prime Minister, just behind those doors, she had literally framed and hung on the wall the words she uttered, to use the phrase that so often is used, on the steps of Downing Street. It's not quite the steps, it's halfway between us and those single step up onto the pavement. So that'll be the crucial moment of the day as she frames what she wants to achieve as Prime Minister and how she thinks she can do it, and then the team around her.
And when the people watching this programme this morning say, I don't really care who's in charge, I just want to know about what's going to happen with my bills this winter, when will they get that information? Is that coming today?
I totally get that kind of flummery, people like me and you perhaps having a certain excitement around witnessing a point of history. To an extent, who cares for people who look at a utility bill and just think, my business, my family cannot survive attempting to pay that. Those around Liz Truss are aware of that, and they're aware that how she is perceived as Prime Minister will be, to a very great extent, shaped by how she responds to this energy crisis. As things stand, penciled in for Thursday is the big announcement, and it looks like it will be big, tens of billions, perhaps £100 billion. Again, that's irrelevant, isn't it, to someone watching our conversation now and saying, yeah, but what does it mean for my bill? And the truth is, we don't know that yet, but she will feel the political weight of a Labour opposition that have said that they would freeze bills this winter. The expectation is something similar is likely to happen. The exact mechanism of how that happens, we don't yet know, but we await the crucial answers to the only questions that matter. Who will be helped, for how long, and by how much?
Yeah. Chris, thank you very much indeed. Chris Mason, our political editor, joining us live on Breakfast in Downing Street. Thanks, Chris. Chris is right. That's what everybody wants to know, isn't it? And Nina is with some voters in Lee in Greater Manchester, just getting a sense of that impatience this morning. Good morning. Hi, Nina.
Yeah, morning, John. Welcome to Astley Green, a village in the heart of Lee in Greater Manchester. I want you to have a look at the image that's behind me, a really arresting image. Have a look at that. Between 1908 and 1970, thousands of men went 2/3 of a mile into the ground to the coalface to pick coal, as they did in many of communities around here. And that's why in 2019, I remember the gasps that went around the room when this constituency, Lee of all places, turned Tory. But since then, we've had Brexit, a global pandemic, and here we are in the depths of an energy crisis. What do people here in Lee want from the new Prime Minister? Here we go.
I give notice that Liz Truss is elected as the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party.
And so a new chapter begins.
She was all about tax cuts, but it doesn't help people on carers allowance.
Liz Truss promised bold plans to help with rising costs, but what you need now depends who you are.
She carried on working for a few months after she was diagnosed.
This is Tony. He gave up work suddenly when his wife Sue developed pulmonary fibrosis. He went from being a high-rate taxpayer to living off a carer's allowance. Their life savings are fading fast. Does it feel fair?
It's the most unfair thing. It's heartbreaking, full stop, watching a loved one. As you'll know, if you've got anybody that you love, it's painful. And you're totally unsupported.
And when you look to what comes next for you and for Sue, what does it look like? What needs to happen?
Well, I have an outcome for me and Sue, unfortunately, because this is a fatal disease. But I need and I want, just like every other carer wants, they want to be recognised for what they do.
Kathleen runs a cooked meat stall. What she worries about is how her 15 employees will cope this winter. Do you think she gets it?
I'm not sure whether she gets it, but I think if she actually comes and speaks to people and actually sees how people live.
And a freeze to corporation tax?
If businesses can't survive because nobody's buying the products, It doesn't matter what corporation tax is.
There are those whose loyalties lie elsewhere.
I would support Labour anyway.
There are those who wish it had fallen a bit differently.
I would have preferred Rishi to get it, but hey-ho.
And then there are some with, frankly, more important things to worry about right now. Liz Truss?
No.
Heard of her?
No.
That's all right, you've got a lot on. Josephine has cerebral palsy and is full-time carer for her husband. She says financial support for the disabled has been disappearing for decades. How much money have you and Gary got in your pocket as the cost of living goes up?
None. None. We have to borrow from family, friends, and then when we do get our money in, obviously then all the money that we get in has to go out to pay people back.
You voted Conservative in 2019. Would you vote for Liz Truss next?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, because I feel that she's doing more than a lot of other people have done.
Josephine's is just one voice in many millions. Liz Truss has won the keys to number 10. Now the challenge begins to keep them. Well, there couldn't have been a wider range of views in Lee Market yesterday. We've come inside the engine room to speak to two people who run businesses in the area. Let's start with Julie. Morning to you. You set up a carer's business as a labour of love back in 2014. When you compare the funding you had then to now, what does it look like?
It's definitely been reduced. There's not as many funding opportunities to apply for, and the social care money that we receive feels like it's been reduced in real terms due to the inflation and everything going up.
The pure cost of everything going up. When Liz Truss says she will deliver, what does that look like in social care and in education?
Well, hopefully there'll be more money pumped into it, and not just taken from the NHS pot, because obviously that's very important too. And education, hopefully, with alternative provision, we serve some students from schools very successfully, and so we'd like to see more money in that area too.
Very quickly, Julie, do you feel that vulnerable people are being failed at the moment because of funding?
I do, really, to a certain extent. Their budgets are being cut, so they can't always attend the day services that they'd like to attend as often as they can, as they used to do. So, yes, all in all, it's...
Yeah, and they're vital services for lots of people, aren't they? Thank you, Julie. And Steve runs a software company, but you also set up a shared space over COVID. Talk to me about that shared space and your energy bills right now.
So we set up Lee Works, which is a co-working space. It's like a cooperative. There's quite a few different businesses based there. We did start during COVID, right at the start. It was just a coincidence. Obviously, we didn't know it was coming, and that was literally day one for us. We managed to make it through that. We did really well. We got over that. But now for us, we're facing a massive issue. So we were actually looking at, we need to renew our energy contract right now. So our energy bills last year were £4,000 for the year. This year it's £27,000. That's like a 7 times increase for us. And that, I mean, that's just not sustainable as it is. So we're just trying to figure out what do we do? How do we make that work?
It would be such a shame to survive COVID and not get through this. Finally, Steve, one way of potentially getting through this is state-backed loans to energy providers, to energy companies, that would take the sting out of that spike, that would flatten the curve, if you like. Would you be up for that, paying back more over a longer period than the immediate shock?
To be honest, I mean, I don't know how effective that will be against the alternatives. I don't know what they all are. I know people have mentioned about decoupling renewable energy, and I know that a lot of the other issues are bigger, longer-term issues like overseas diplomacy and things like that. So, I mean, if that's the only workable solution, we need something right now. I mean, that's definitely what we need. Whether that then makes sense to pay back, I mean, it'd be better if there was a better solution that actually fixed the real issue.
But as you said to me earlier, it has to happen now, so potentially it's the only solution. Sally, what was really interesting speaking to people in Lee yesterday is how many people held their hands up and said, I don't really know what's going on. I've given up on a lot of them. So perhaps the challenge for Liz Truss now is to restore trust and engagement.
Nina, thanks very much indeed. It is 8:51. Now, for the last 2 years, TV presenter Gabby Logan has been talking candidly about her life on her podcast, The Midpoint. Its purpose is to help everybody else navigate the halfway stage of life. But for Gabby's husband, Kenny, it has achieved far more than that. After listening to an episode, he was pushed to take action that might have actually saved his own life. Gabby and Kenny are here on the sofa with us this morning. Morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to let you tell everybody at home what this latest episode of the podcast is about, why it was so important that you had this chat, Kenny.
So I was... Gabby's obviously got her podcast, and I stumbled across it through accident. So as I was going
He's
through...
an avid listener.
I'm a massive listener of it. And it was actually about menopause, about women lose their hormones and like falling off a cliff, when a man takes longer to fall off the cliff. And as I was going through all this in my head, I thought, what about me? What's happening to me? And Gabby said, why do you not get checked? And so I went to get a sort of wellness check. I got the wellness check, and I sat down with the guy, and he said to me, right, everything's fine, your hormones are fine. He said, but your prostate is high. Your PSA is high. And I said, what does that mean? He goes, well, it's to do with your prostate, you probably should get checked. So I got checked, and very quickly, within about 3 or 4 months, I had a biopsy, and they said there's something there, but, you know, just keep an eye on it, but the chances of it happening. The big figure, he said to me, 40% of your mates have got this, they just don't know they've got it. And then this year...
But they'll live with it, you know.
They'll live with it.
A lot of men will live with it and not know they've got it.
And then this year, February the 7th, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, which was a huge shock. So I had to make some decisions, 3 decisions. One, you go for radiotherapy and take it out, or the other... Brachytherapy. So I ended up deciding to take it out. So I'm now 3 months since the operation, had the prostate out. I'm probably 95% back to normal, maybe 90% back to normal. Hard, because when you're told you've got cancer, and you didn't... I literally fell over it. I didn't see it coming. No symptoms whatsoever. I had to go looking for it.
I think that was the shocking thing for both of us, that the day before he went in for his operation, I'm jumping forwards a bit, he'd done a bike session, he had no pain, he had no symptoms, and to go in and have surgery, which is, it's a really invasive surgery, and obviously it takes a long time to recover from, you know, you're going to feel a lot worse after it.
Yeah, I was pretty battered after
it. But very, very, very lucky.
Extremely lucky.
I mean, it's obviously a subject that's really close to our hearts here on BBC Breakfast, because we lost our Bill last week, who had prostate cancer. He died at the age of 66. And the thing that is so important is getting checked, talking to people about it. And the thing I think probably people watching this morning will think is, you know, people are looking out for symptoms. You had none.
Don't look, if you're looking for symptoms, it's, well, I said to the specialist, I said, it's weird getting this operation, I've got no symptoms. And he said, well, if you had symptoms, the conversation would be different.
And so that's the scary thing about prostate cancer. The thing we know about prostate cancer, of course, well, we know now, I mean, you become kind of, obviously, you speak to people and you learn, is that men, Caucasian men, it tends to be around 50, black men, it tends to be a bit earlier, 45. That's when the PSA needs to be checked. It's a really good test to see whether or not there's something a little bit not right. And then you go for further tests after that. So we know it's happening to men at this age.
It's a blood test.
And it's really simple.
That's
you know, I think a lot of your friends were put off thinking that it was a bit more invasive than that, shall we say, the first test.
That might happen, though.
Yeah, OK.
Just so you know.
Yeah, it could get worse.
But if it is happening, it's because they found something.
And because they're potentially going to save your life.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. And I was, through the podcast, listening to Gabby, I think it might have been Davina McCall talking about it, I can't remember. And I just thought, what about me? What's happening to men at this stage? And obviously women, this whole thing about HRT, but there's the man's going through something too, and 1 in 2 people tend to get prostate.
And that's why, because you said, as soon as, you know, he knew and we started going through the kind of the medical side of what was happening to him, he said, when I'm through this, I really would like to do an episode, because it's about talking, isn't it, and using your platform, and that was your motivation.
I want to talk about the podcast, the actual episode, for a moment, because it is staggeringly honest. It's not like, it wasn't what I expected. It was almost like an audio diary, because you started talking to each other about it and recording it right at the very start. And you, Gabby, are so calm. How real is that sense of calm?
Well, because it's my job, I suppose I went into work mode a bit, and I I kind of sat there, we were in my office, and because I record my podcast there, I was in the same seat that I do all my interviews, so I kind of turned myself into interviewer and tried to talk to Kenny in a way that we could elicit information. I want people to listen to it and learn about it. I wanted to listen to this podcast myself on February the 8th when Kenny was diagnosed, and that's what I want people to be able to learn something from it. His urologist is incredible. Declan, I think, was brilliant, you know, and the producer of the podcast said to me, you don't often hear consultants talking like that. And he explains brilliantly what is going on with the prostate, why it's important to get it checked, what you can do about it. So really, it's kind of like 45, 50 minutes of information, you know, and of course there is some emotion because...
No, it's emotional. The night before, I'd sort of... Declan said to me, don't Google it, I'll give you all the information.
Yeah.
So I didn't really want too much information. I wanted to know when my operation was, what it was going to feel like. I wanted to just take it as it... Because I've been in sports and I used to always just... I would take it as it was coming. I didn't want to know too much. Just let me know and I'll just deal with the situation. And I think the night before, it was quite emotional because you start thinking about, is it contained in the prostate? Has it moved out of the prostate? I won't know until Friday how well has it gone. What's the other damages what happens when they take it out? What's the recovery going to be like? So there's all these questions, and I just kept going on. And I suppose when they said to me after the operation, it came out really well, the nerves are all protected, we think that it's not come out, it stayed in within the prostate. They said, we've got a blood test in 3 months' time. But I didn't think about it then. He brought it up again, we've got to come back for a blood test. So then it came back to me again, going, right, and now I need to think about, I hope it's not gone any further. And I'm lucky it hasn't gone any further. So I've been cleared with the fact that my blood test 3 months after is clear. But I didn't go looking for this. This came to me through me just being nosy about something else.
And that's your motivation to do this, isn't it? Just to say, get checked.
Yeah. So I was just going to say exactly that. Sitting here on this sofa this morning, we're just coming up to 9 o'clock. What's your message, Kenny?
Go looking for it. If you're 50, I was 48, 49. Go looking for it. Get checked. It's a blood test. It's simple.
How do you do that?
GPs...
the GP will book you for the blood test.
Book you for the blood test.
Most of you will be fine, but some of you might need to have further tests.
And how are the rest of the family?
They're all great.
Are they?
Yeah. The kids are...
My mum, I didn't tell my mum until... because my mum's 90. She's really fit, but she didn't need to worry about it. And I told her 3 weeks after. But she did say to me, she started telling me about everybody else who was ill at the same time.
The kids have been... that's not his mum, by the way. That's our 17-year-old daughter. But
she looks well.
She looks great.
The kids have been incredible. They've been
amazing.
Thank you both for coming in and sharing your story.
Thank you,
for talking to us this morning.
Thank you.
Best of luck. And the Midpoint special episode with Kenny will be available from tomorrow. Do listen. You're watching BBC Breakfast. It's 8:59. Hello, as I said, you're watching BBC Breakfast. Much of the programme has been dominated by politics this morning. Let's go back to Downing Street. John, who's outside number 10 for us. Morning, John.
Hi, Sally. Yeah, amid all the frenzy and energy of Downing Street this morning, I was just listening to that conversation you're having with Kenny and Gabby. Really, really moving, and it will resonate with so many people. So, yeah, interesting to hear that. Yeah, it's been a crazy morning here in Downing Street. At the end of the Boris Johnson era, he came out at number 10 out from the door at about 7:30 on the dot and addressed the nation for the last time as Prime Minister. He's now on his way to Balmoral. That's where he hands in his resignation to the Queen, bringing his 3-year premiership to an end before the Truss era begins. But let's have a quick listen back to what Boris Johnson had to say.
Well, this is it, folks. Thank you, everybody, for coming out so early this morning. In only a couple of hours, I will be in Balmoral to see Her Majesty the Queen. And the torch will finally be passed to a new Conservative leader. The baton will be handed over in what has unexpectedly turned out to be a relay race. They changed the rules halfway through, but never mind that now. And through that lacquered black door, a new Prime Minister will shortly go to meet a fantastic group of public servants. The people who got Brexit done. The people who delivered the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, and never forget, 70% of the entire population got a dose within 6 months, faster than any comparable country. That is government for you. That's this Conservative government. People who organised those prompt early supplies of weapons to the heroic Ukrainian armed forces, an action that may very well have helped change the course of the biggest European war for 80 years. And because of the speed and urgency of what you did, everybody involved in this government, to get this economy moving again from July last year, in spite of all the opposition, all the naysayers, we have and will continue to have that economic strength to give people the cash they need to get through this energy crisis that has been caused by Putin's vicious war. And I know that Liz Truss and this compassionate Conservative government will do everything we can to get people through this crisis, and this country will endure it, and we will win. And if Putin thinks that he can succeed by blackmailing or bullying the British people, then he is utterly deluded. Above all, thanks to you, the British people, to the voters for giving me the chance to serve, all of you who worked so tirelessly together to beat COVID, to put us where we are today. Together, we have laid foundations that will stand the test of time, whether by taking back control of our laws or putting in vital new infrastructure. Great, solid masonry on which we will continue to build together, paving the path of prosperity now and for future generations. And I will be supporting Liz Truss and the new government every step of the way. Thank you all very much. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you.
Boris Johnson leaving Downing Street a little bit earlier, live here on Breakfast. This is a day of two halves here. He has now gone to Scotland. Liz Truss arrives this afternoon, but a difference in mood as well between these two halves of the day. Nick is still with us. This afternoon is going to be really different, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of saw Boris Johnson nod to that in his speech when he talked about tough economic times, urging his party to get behind Liz Truss. When she is on that flight down later from Aberdeenshire back to London, before she's driven here to make that first speech as Prime Minister, she will have a lot to mull over because the entry is incredibly daunting. You know, recession, many predicting, the cost of living crisis, a crisis in the NHS. It really does feel like Liz Truss is entering the eye of the storm later on, but nothing is going to matter more than what she does on the cost of living, and that's what is going to absolutely dominate the next few days. I think she'll talk about it later today, and then later this week we'll get her full plan for what she plans to do to help all of us with the cost of living crisis. And my expectation is there will be a price freeze, that it's likely to cover most, if not all, households and a lot of businesses as well, and that will be her first big, I should say, intervention as Prime Minister. The thing that she hopes will get her off the ground running with something she hopes will set her out as someone who can help with the cost of living crisis. But when she stands there later this afternoon, possibly around 4 o'clock, weather permitting, it will be her chance to set out a vision to the country, but it's against a backdrop of some really challenging times.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. Nick says weather permitting. It's a really important part of the theatre of today because every Prime Minister wants that moment, don't they, where they stand at the podium right on that spot and they deliver their message, their arrival message. You can think back in your own head to Prime Ministers we've all seen coming and going over the decades, and that moment where they set out their agenda, they said hello to the country in office. The rain means there's a storm coming this afternoon, that might not be possible. She might have to do it inside later in the afternoon. She won't want to do that. So the weather is going to be a really important part of how today pans out. You can follow the whole thing live on the BBC throughout the day, weather and all. But first, let's get a brief last look at the headlines and the weather where you're watching Breakfast this morning. We'll see you in a moment. Hello there, welcome back to Downing Street, where it's all been happening this morning. The end of the Boris Johnson era and the beginning of the Liz Truss era to come. And we're joined here outside Number 10 by the political commentator Matt Chorley and the Daily Mirror's political correspondent Alita Adu. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming in. So what do we make of the farewell speech, Matt? What do you think of his performance? It was a performance, wasn't it?
It was a performance, and it was classic Boris Johnson. There were jokes and weird references to ancient Greek, maybe.
Roman, I understand.
Rome.
From
Thank
Google.
you. Thank you. I knew you'd know that.
I didn't know.
And jokes about the cat and the dog and all of that. I think actually the joke about the cat and the dog is probably the most telling. So he was talking about if Dylan the dog and Larry the cat can get on, then maybe the Tory party can too. Lots of pleas for unity. And it's one of those things, if you have to keep calling for unity, it suggests there might not be a lot of unity. And there were a lot of Tory MPs, an awful lot of Tory MPs who turned out to see him depart. But just as significant are the ones who didn't, the ones that, more than 200 MPs haven't publicly backed Liz Truss. And so it's a sign perhaps of the many tasks waiting for when she gets in there later on. Reuniting the Tory party is going to be a very big part of that.
And Alita, when Liz Truss appears here and does her speech this afternoon, as we're saying, weather permitting, the tone of it, her style of it, is just going to be so different, such a contrast.
It will be such a contrast, and it'll be interesting to see how she tries to top that. Somebody who, oversaw a number of scandals while he was the Prime Minister. We had Partygate, Tory sleaze, instance of sexual assault that he was aware of. He was, employing people into really top positions. But apparently none of that matters as he, was leaving Number 10. He spoke about his achievements. He was keen to highlight that he has fixed social care, which couldn't be further from the truth. Apparently he's obviously got Brexit done and COVID vaccines happened. So that's what he wants people to remember about, not the fact that he didn't show any sort of contrition, which is quite striking. Obviously Liz Truss will have to try and top that. She looked a bit awkward in her speech yesterday, I must admit. We saw a woman who has grown in confidence and charisma during the Tory leadership race. Seemed as though she sort of lost that yesterday. I don't know what you think, Matt.
Yeah, and I think it would be interesting, having run as the Boris Johnson continuity candidate, she was the loyalist, she didn't quit. One of the big factors, I think, of Rishi Sunak not winning was the fact that the Tory party membership still liked Boris Johnson and they blamed Rishi Sunak for ousting him. The interesting thing will be to the extent to which each new Prime Minister tries to define themselves from the previous one. Theresa May, when she arrived, was very serious and no spin, and she stopped tweeting and all that sort of stuff, as a contrast to David Cameron. Boris Johnson, much more, based on the performance we had today, more jokes and performance than Theresa May. And so although she arrives as the continuity candidate, the extent to which she tries to define herself as being different to him, I suspect we'll hear lots of things that you and I will obsess about internal workings and making sure that can never happen again, or everything that went on with Partygate and so on, while also trying to keep Boris Johnson on side, because he says he's a rocket that's going to be dropping somewhere into the Pacific Ocean. The truth is, he'll drop into a newspaper somewhere, and everything he writes will be picked over endlessly. He says he's going to be loyal to the new government and to the new Prime Minister, but that doesn't sell newspapers. And the temptation for him to say, well, I wouldn't have quite done it like that, I think will be quite strong.
And there's all the political theatre and the cameras in here today, and all the fuss and the jamboree, meeting the Queen. But at least at the end of the day, everybody watching this programme just wants to know what help is coming my way. When am I going to find out whether I can pay my bills and get through this winter? That's what people want to hear from her most of all, isn't it?
Exactly, and when the last time Boris Johnson stood here after he was ousted, it was quite an embarrassing moment for him, and he managed to sort of make light of that moment as well, saying them's the breaks. He insisted, he told the public that he will, he wants to remain Prime Minister so that he can ensure that, things are getting done. But we've had, horrifying stats of inflation. We know that energy bills are going to continue to be skyrocketing. I'm speaking to people who are already struggling, who are already having to make huge sacrifices, and it's summer. Bills are going to be skyrocketing again in October and January. His successors, we now know Liz Truss, she's refused to divulge any sort of, hints as to what help she might bring people. It's just a really worrying and horrifying time for many people across the country, not just the poorest as well, but also middle-income people, which makes it quite striking as to...
And I do wonder as well where Liz Truss clearly thinks a big bang announcement this week is going to put rocket boosters on rockets again, put
That's
rocket
that word
boosters
again,
under her premiership, and she'll end the week ahead in the polls and all of that. I do wonder, because it's been such a long contest, drawn out all over the summer, and people have been very engaged. People are much more engaged in politics than perhaps they used to be,
Which is
and particularly this summer. When people have been so worried about energy bills, and they keep looking for answers, and they haven't had that from Liz Truss. And I just wonder whether she doesn't get the boost just because by the time she does it, they'll say, well, of course you had to do that.
Just seeing these pictures that have just been released.
Oh, yeah.
This is Boris Johnson and his wife Carrie taken inside Downing Street, saying goodbye to staff, saying goodbye to friends as they prepare to leave and give that speech a bit later. He's now in a plane. I think last I saw he was flying over Wakefield, which is kind of significant, isn't it, after the by-election?
And all that clapping, or they do all the clapping, they clap them all out. And although the political people leave, the civil servants stay, they're tidying up, they're flicking the hoover around, and then they'll clap the new Prime Minister in all over again, and the process starts very, very quickly.
Another podium later today. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us. You two are going to have a busy day. The political world is going to have a busy time, and then we all find out as a country what that future is going to be. We'll be back in Downing Street for tomorrow morning because there's going to be a cabinet meeting about this time, so we'll find out who the new faces are and what they're going to do to affect all of us as Liz Truss starts her first full day in the job. But first, let's go to speak to our friends at Morning Live. Michelle and Gethin are there this morning. Morning, guys.
Thank you, John. Yeah, a huge day for British politics. We'll get your reaction to that on the show today. Also coming up on Morning Live, it's the potentially deadly heart condition that